Good evening, everyone. My name's Vice Chair Keith Penny, and I'd like to call the May 11th Committee of the Whole meeting to order and acknowledge that a meeting is taking place in unceded Algonquin territories. I would like to thank the Algonquin nations for hosting this meeting on their land. And with that, I would like to move on and seek a mover for the public agenda. Trustee Jenkins, thank you very much. And are there any changes to the agenda? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on the agenda. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And that passes. And moving on to our delegations. This evening we have 7 delegations, 3 of which are 4-minute delegations, and 4 of which are 2-minute delegations. And I believe the people that are delegating, did you have your hand up, Trustee Lara?
Oh, floating hand, my bad.
No problem. Thank you very much. And I can see that the people that are delegating this evening are have already joined us, some of them. And so I'd like to call upon Winson Lee to join us for a 4-minute delegation. And Winson, you have 4 minutes to present your delegation, and then that will be followed by up to 3 questions of clarification by trustees. So you can see the timer there, and please go ahead.
Good evening, I guess. I'm a little bit nervous. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent.
So I'm here because Justine asked me to be here. I don't really want to be here, to be honest. I feel like I shouldn't have to be. But I wanted to speak on the topic of Cambridge. And I used to be a student there about 20 years ago. And I'm not sure if you've seen the piece in the Ottawa Citizen, but I wrote a piece in there for them in the editorial about a week ago. Justine suggested I read it, but I'm not going to because I don't want to do your homework for you. But we were also on the radio this morning, if you caught that, to just raise awareness for Cambridge. So, I mean, I feel like you know what you need to do, and I feel like a few parents have really spoken out. There just haven't been a lot of them because most of the parents that had kids at that school were immigrant parents, and they couldn't speak out that well enough for their kids. But anyways, it's just alarming that the student numbers have gotten so low. And I've been told that I don't understand how the politics works with the school board, with these community things. But I've been told there's going to be to expect some strong resistance. I really don't understand why there's resistance to just adding a dual track French immersion program to the school. I mean, it's a waste of resources just to have 55 students in a building that can contain 328. Unless you plan on closing it soon, it's a waste of resources just to have 55 students there. So I really don't understand, unless whoever's is providing so much resistance to just having these small changes at Cambridge. I mean, unless you really want to hoard resources at your local schools instead of just like spreading it out, spreading resources into a minority, a school that serves economically disadvantaged kids and immigrant communities. It's like, I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, these are the the kids that went to that school were probably the poorest kids in the city, and you're with not giving them enough resources. And you didn't when I was there. I definitely could have used more resources, especially compared to the other schools in surrounding neighborhoods. But I mean, I feel like the school boards really relied on momentum, on just having immigrant families move in. But they're not moving in anymore because the housing prices are too expensive. But there are new families that are more educated, and they're still moving in, but they don't want to send their kids there because there's no French immersion at the school. Anyways, I feel like I don't understand if you're voted in or appointed or whatever, but if you're voted in, if the people that voted you in knew that you've like put the school at such a level of neglect and neglected these minority communities and poor people, do you expect them to vote for you again next term? I mean, let's hope they don't find out. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. And I'm just wondering if there are any questions of clarification for Mr. Lee. Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You actually made a lot of great points. I appreciate that. I guess my question to you, though, is I think it's not necessarily the only way to think about things, but for a number of folks, I think in their minds, there's almost three questions or three issues. One is the presence of a school with any programming whatsoever in the neighborhood to act as a neighborhood hub, and the importance or not, and neighborhood services, the importance or not of that, right? The question of whether it is paramount to have a healthy English language program with adequate numbers, provide adequate programming and supports, and the extent to which it's important to add other like service offerings, like a French immersion of some sort or something else. So there's almost, in a sense, three issues. And I guess what my question to you is, first of all, do you see it that way? And if so, do one of these issues have greater priority for you than another? And if so, why? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the questions or bringing those up. But I feel like if you just added a dual track French immersion program, all of those issues would be solved. Firstly, regarding the community issue, regarding it becoming a community hub, it's not good. It's not a community hub anymore. It's with only 55 students attending in person. I mean, it would grow if you added French immersion with more local families bringing their kids there. And then having a good English language program is important, but I mean, families don't want that anymore. I mean, unless there are real issues with the children having trouble learning, they don't want their kids in English language programs. And I don't know what the second one was. What was the second thing?
Yeah, I think you addressed the first two. I think you addressed all three. So that's good. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And is there any further questions for Mr. Lee? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation, Mr. Lee. You can certainly stay and listen to the rest of the delegations. And we have with us the next delegation, which is also a 4-minute delegation. You see the timer on the screen, and it's Carol Sissons. Go ahead, Ms. Sissons.
Good evening. The following insights I have gained from over 40 years of being a parent and a volunteer at Cambridge School. The first is that the school has had 123 years as a school center for excellence in education for the neighborhood children. And that has been based on a grounding of not only literacy and numeracy, but a sense of place in their immediate community and beyond. The remarkable stories and successes of alumni shared at the 1998 Centennial celebrations and subsequently are a resounding testament to the value of those broader educational goals. Second, this rich tradition of excellence has endured in spite of dramatic and continuous changes in the demographics of the neighborhood, from the strong European working class backgrounds in the early 1900s to successive waves of immigration from single nation and multi-nation intakes, on to the present upscaling of housing stock with increasing disparity in income levels. It remains a very diverse community with a sizable population near or below the poverty line. Income inequality, as well as ethnic differences, can provide flashpoints for issues of tolerance and integration. For a community school to serve a fundamental role in the formation of values of acceptance and tolerance of differences, it must accurately reflect the neighborhood by having all the children in the neighborhood learning and growing together in the same school. Third, the board has been able to achieve remarkable successes at Cambridge because it has demonstrated an understanding of some of the unique characteristics of changing and diverse neighborhood and adapted standard practices with flexibility and creativity. In 40 years, I've seen over a dozen principals place their unique stamps on the school. Portables come and go. Citywide programs come and go. School councils making passionate pleas before sector reviews and accommodation reviews. Scores of community programs before and after school and during school. And neighborhood businesses helping students grow and market vegetables and provide nutritious lunches. All this incredible source of strength for both the community and the school has been able to flourish despite huge and repeated swings in the demographic structure of the community. Whenever a plea has gone out to make a shift, whether in programs, boundaries, or resources to allow Cambridge to adjust, the board has been able to show flexibility and creativity in supporting an institution in the neighborhood which has always and continues to need a strong integrating school at its core. I urge you to carry on this tradition and support a school in which everyone in the community is able to go to. And at this point, that seems to be a dual track English EFI. It is essential that all these children mix together in a caring, accepting, and inclusive school, which can provide a focal point for the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sissons. And do we have any questions of clarification? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation. Certainly, please stick around to listen to the rest of them. And moving on to our third delegation, which is also a 4-minute one, and that is by Murat Ehrlich. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to say that I am also very nervous, but with me, I have today my Cambridge Street Public School sweater that I had many moons ago, and it still fits. I guess full disclosure, I am a teacher in the board. I teach at my other wonderful school that I also went to, Glashan Public School. So I'd like to, if I can, without getting too emotional, give you my account of a wonderful school and a wonderful community. And Carol, it's really nice to see you, although it's online. It's I went to school with Carol's son, Charlie, good man, and Carol, remarkable community member. So thanks, Carol, for doing all that you do for the community. You're a wonderful human being. Okay, I'd like to start. So again, thank you for the opportunity to provide you with an account of my personal journey and the instrumental role Cambridge had on guiding me on my whirlwind of a life. In context, or for context, I grew up in the now barren community of Rochester Heights. My house address was 530 Booth. I was born and raised by my single immigrant mother who left a terribly abusive husband. I have 2 older sisters. My household environment was very chaotic, to say the least, dealing with my severely depressed mother and my newly arrived grandma from Turkey that did not speak English was very difficult. Throughout this early mess of a life, I had one thing that was always consistent, and that was my foundation. It was Cambridge. Cambridge provided me with many opportunities that were beyond the scope and reach of my family. It provided me with solid footings to express and cope with my anger and my anxiety that were ever so present. I was able to connect to a plethora of friends who are also going through similar experiences. These childhood friends are still, to this day, my dearest friends. In addition, the athletic opportunities that were provided for me and the rest of the student community were beyond remarkable. And I really mean that, beyond remarkable. You don't see that these days. We were angry kids from immigrant families who did not have the means to pursue athletics outside the school context. We were given a safe space to express our emotions and the frustration of our home lives in a competitive and supportive environment at school. As I reminisce on these vital opportunities for young, impressionable youth like myself, it brings me great joy, for it was these experiences that led me to who I am today, a teacher and a coach, giving back to the community that gave me so much. Please take my story as an example of the positive power the school system have on children and youth, particularly from vulnerable and underrepresented populations. I humbly ask you to take this into account and consider the equality of those who are unable to make their voice heard. With the introduction of a dual-track program, Cambridge is a viable public school choice for Centertown residents and the diverse population that surrounds it. What was possible then is possible again, and that could make a profound difference for the children who need it the most. I hope you take these unspoken voices into consideration when making your decision. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Ehrlich. And questions of clarification from trustees. Trustee Ellis, go ahead.
Hello, thank you. You spoke about how, as you were growing up, that the school was a touch point for you. And I'm wondering if you could comment on how having a school within walking distance might have been, it gave you a different, or let me put it, how a school, if you were bused to, might have given you a different experience. And I don't know, perhaps you were bused to Cambridge, as having a school in your community. And since you're still in the educational field, if you see that need has changed over time, or may it still be there?
Well, I wasn't.
Sorry, for having a school in their community that they can walk to as opposed to being bused to.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. Again, in my student career and my profession, Glashan is mostly a walk-in school. People in the gifted program, and we have a general learning program, are bused in. But for the most part, it's a community school. It's a community hub. And that was the case when I was at Cambridge Street Public School. Many people from the community that I lived walked to school every day. I walked with my sisters. I walked with the people in the community, and we just knew each other. It was a real community hub. After school programs, prior to school programs, teams. It was just. There was just this sense of belonging. I don't know the other way. I can't comment on that because I have no context of that. My reality was and continues to be this concept of community where we know each other, we know each other's families, and we get together for birthdays, and we see each other in the community. So
Thank you.
my experience.
Thank you very much. And are there any further questions for Mr. Ehrlich? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation, Mr. Ehrlich.
Thank you.
And now moving on to our next delegation, which is now a 2-minute delegation. And I don't really see her on our screen, Shauna Malcolm, but if she is, could you, and I don't see her. So if she does show up, we can fit her in maybe a bit later. But then moving on to the next one, Marty Carr. Go ahead, Marty.
Thank you, Chair. As president of the Alta Vista Community Association and an OCDSB parent and volunteer, I closely follow board business. As such, I'm aware the evidence-based board-approved schedule for the multi-year plan for accommodation planning includes Alta Vista Hunt Club as the next review to be undertaken, and no motion or decision to modify this schedule has been made. This highly anticipated resource and program review presents a tremendous and much-needed opportunity, as there are significant and long-standing issues of equity in Alta Vista, where many schools are raised schools, including 3 English-only ones that are significantly undersubscribed and predominantly serve multicultural communities of new Canadians. Any effort in recent years by community members advocating for changes to programming to increase equity have been responded to by trustees and staff alike that these matters will be addressed in the upcoming review when it resumes. It is therefore challenging to understand why a motion to consider changes to programming to one school outside of the next review area is being considered. Where is the equity in a small group of students in Centertown being granted an EFI program where the racialized and immigrant community of Herongate, the area with the second lowest neighborhood equity index in Ottawa, has no access to EFI at Charles Hull School, which is located directly in their community, but instead students wanting EFI are bused 3.5 kilometers to oversubscribed Pleasant Park. While I unequivocally support improving access to EFI programming for all students, I'm certainly extremely sympathetic to the sponsoring trustee's situation, and I understand that without EFI being introduced at Cambridge in the fall, even her child will need to change schools should she wish to enroll in it, and that's certainly inconvenient. But I would, however, ask the remaining members of the board, in the interest of equity, to consider the needs of all OCDSB families who they represent when considering the expansion of EFI, and not just a select few in one community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Carr. And we do have a question of clarification from Trustee Blackburn. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. And I'd like to thank Ms. Carr for her delegation and her longtime commitment to the OCDSB and her community. So I know you, as you've indicated, you're very in touch, obviously, as the president of a community association and somebody with students in the OCDSB. Can you tell me, are people in your community aware that this motion is even taking place before the board?
No, we've received no notice of it. And in fact, all the community associations banded together several years ago when the Alta Vista Hunt Club review was about to start and had a series of meetings. Folks were very engaged and very concerned about the review because the high number of raised schools in our community. I won't speak to the Hunt Club aspect of the review, but within Alta Vista alone, we have 6 raised schools, which is quite significant because we only have 10 schools in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And any further questions for Ms. Carr? And seeing none, I'd like to thank you for your delegation, Ms. Carr. Moving on to number 6, Christopher Payne. Go ahead, Mr. Payne.
I mute my mic there. Sorry, yeah. So I'll be quick. I'm on the parent council at Cambridge, and so I'm part of that whole group of people that are like, "What the hell is going on here?" And so when I started as a parent council, my son started 2 years ago. There, we had 70 some kids, or I guess 100 kids, and now we're down to, as we've known, 55. So I think everybody knows about the community aspect of it. Of course, it is also the host for a Boys and Girls Club of Ottawa. It has an early on program. There's a bunch of stuff going on there for sure, of course. And of course, it is a community hub with people all the time going in and out. But I did want to only just touch quickly at the end on this, the idea of the equity piece, because, and I respect everybody's comments, and you're absolutely right. What's going on now, though, as this school gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and now down to 55 kids, the effect of the small student population has such an adverse effect on the school's student experience, and that's becoming really problematic with 1, 2, 3 grades, like a 3-grade split class, things like that. No sports, no. I mean, of course, nobody's doing it in pandemic. I know that, and of course, we're all aware that English only is de facto streaming. We know it's just a fact, right? So I don't know. I just wanted to end up by saying that we all understand that school is not sustainable as an English language only school. The program, English language only program, is unsustainable as for a school. And of course, it is a streaming thing. So I just want you to know that the parent council is in full support of Justine's motion towards moving towards this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. And we do have a question from Trustee Ellis. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. You touched on the English program, which has been a challenge for that many of us have been raising for a number of years now. But in this, from your experience at Cambridge, do you think it would be a general policy of a good idea for the board to consider a general policy of having English programming in dual or triple track schools as we move forward?
I think that there's a decrease in the demand for English language only programming. I think there was a time, absolutely, when I joined the parent council, there were parents that shared with me, and I think Carol would speak to this as well. There were parents that really wanted to have English language only. Their children spoke other languages at home, and that was fine. Right now in my son's class, there's children that speak German at home. There's children that speak Italian at home. There's children that speak Spanish at home. All of them want to have French language as well. So there's a fundamental change, I think, in the way people are approaching language, approaching education, and especially in Ottawa, where the unfortunate streaming effect of pure English is there. We see it very much in Ottawa. It is almost unique, I think, to Ottawa. I don't want to say that. I don't know, but because of the way we live in this city. So is there still demand for English language only? I suspect that probably there is. Is it decreasing? Clearly it is. Clearly we're down to 55 students. This is the English language school, right? So you just can't argue with the numbers.
Thank you very much. And we have a further question from Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate all the delegations this evening. And I just want to reflect, particularly for you, Mr. Payne. I think when Ms. Carr was speaking just about sort of the equity around accommodation reviews. And this is where I'm also quite concerned about the fact that the province really has disallowed boards to go ahead with accommodation reviews. We're still waiting for the board for approval from the province to reinvigorate the review process that we wanted to undertake already a couple of years ago and begin that process, of which Cambridge would have been on the list of a part of a review. And so I'm also really worried about the unsustainable nature of schools of 55 kids. I hear what all the delegates are saying, and I'm quite concerned about that. And so I'd like to know from sort of the parent council perspective, are you talking to the province and saying to the province, in order for us to be viable as a community school, we need the province to once again allow accommodation reviews. So it gives the board opportunities to look at what is the right fit for the current student body across the city.
Yes, we have. We started this process. So I've been on this parent council now for 3 years. We started this basically the first year that I was involved with it, and some parents have now gone on. Their children now at Devonshire and Centennial. But the parents that were on that so we have approached, we've sent letters to Joel Harden. We've sent letters to also, I mean, we approached everybody. We sent them to everybody, right? But of course, as you know, there's limited kind of traction and that sort of thing. So I understand exactly what you're saying. We are more than willing to keep pushing that way. Absolutely, as a parent council, for sure. But we have done it, yes.
And have you heard anything back? That's really my question.
Yeah, and I'm not going to draw a direct line to Joel Harden's political affiliation and the current government's political, but I think we know what's going on there, and this is not something that's getting a lot of traction from that
Okay,
on that end,
thank
for
you.
sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And seeing no further questions for Mr. Payne. Thank you very much, Mr. Payne. And moving on to our last delegation, Patrick Corriveau. Go ahead, Mr. Corriveau.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Justine, for giving voice to the issue that so many parents have raised to you, and also to the trustees as a whole group for allowing us this forum tonight. My wife and I moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago when she was 9 months pregnant with their first child, who's now 3 years old, obviously. And we've since had a second child. So this is an issue that hits really close to home. I am a Cambridge Street resident, live about 5 doors down from Justine. We decided to move into Chinatown, Centertown West, because of an experience that I have had that was quite formative about 15 years ago when I was coaching youth volleyball. And a lot of the kids that I had the pleasure to teach the game to had come out of Cambridge and Glaston. Glaston especially is a bit of a hub in the city. And I just found it such an incredible mix of high income, low income, new Canadians, fourth generation Canadians, and everybody really got along well in this diverse neighborhood. So we decided to move downtown, and as we're making our choice as to where to send our son for September, because he's going to be school eligible for September, our biggest concern is that not having access to French language would really disadvantage him. My wife is a trained dentist. She went to McGill University. She can certainly see from a professional and an educational perspective the advantages of having French language as a tool. Myself, I work at RBC. I'm a professional obviously as a banker. I've been in the industry for 10 years. And I also use French on a day-to-day basis. So it's just not an option for us to send our children to a school that does not have French language. And when I speak to a lot of parents in the neighborhood, I hear the same message over and over. The one concern that I have is it appears it's not having an English only option is really, excuse the term, it's pretty strong, but it's ghettoizing the school. We see school enrollment decreasing.
Mr. Corriveau, but could you finish up, please?
Sure. What I wanted to do, or what I would like to propose, is that if we have a petition of 50 parents or so from ages kindergarten to grade 2, and we show that there is some community interest, perhaps the trustees can bring to the board a consideration to look at doing dual track, which would include French immersion starting in fall 2022. I appreciate that COVID is a difficult time to start new initiatives in. So that's what I was thinking with 2022, if we have an organized community and a clear enrollment, a clear desire from the community for the programs, it could be more feasible for the budget to be allocated. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Corriveau. And we do have a question from Trustee Blackburn. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, and thank you, Mr. Corriveau, for coming tonight and giving us your delegation. So you are probably aware that we have many single track schools in our district that are English only. And so I guess my question is, what if, a bunch of parents from each of those schools came to us and asked for dual track, which doesn't assist with the English numbers. You'd still have triple split classes and all that. But do you not see, from our perspective or from a planning perspective, that that would throw our system pretty much into chaos? We have a plan that we haven't been able to, we have a 5-year plan. We've only been able to do 1 year of it, and the ministry paused our plan. And so we have to, like, do you understand where, from our perspective, we have to do things in a methodical way? We can't do one-offs. Do you see where that
No,
would be a problem?
Absolutely. From my perspective, my understanding is that we have 166 kids that get bused to Devonshire that are in the Cambridge School District. Not only does that have a negative impact on the Cambridge school community through not having a mix of various incomes and backgrounds, but there's also the obvious environmental impact of putting kids on buses and sending them throughout the city. So I can appreciate what you're saying, that it would be pretty difficult. My thought was that if we have an organized community and there is a desire, there would be some funding that would need to go towards the initiative. That if we were able to have a bit of an enrollment drive, for lack of a better word, then perhaps if there was a goal for the community to work towards to help reinvigorate the school with the lowest enrollment in the city, this could be something to band the community together.
All right. I'd like to thank you very much, Mr. Corvo, for your delegation. And
Thanks for your time.
And I'd like to thank all the delegations for coming before us and speaking. We did have one, Shauna Malcolm, that is not here. So if at a later point, I might be able to fit her in between two actions if she does show up. So thank you again very much. And we're going to move on in our agenda to briefing from the chair.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that Mr. Lee had his hand up, and just if you could just let him know usually what the rules are around.
Very, very well. You are quite correct, Trustee Schwartz. So, Mr. Lee, I'm sorry, but the questions that come at the end of delegations are unfortunately only for trustees at this time. So I'm not able to allow that question. So then moving on to in our agenda to briefing from the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First announcement, one of great interest to all of us, I'm sure.
Now that's a cliffhanger. Is that the end of the season? I guess
Building suspense.
So I guess the West End is famous for having really bad internet, especially just outside of the city limits. So I'm afraid we might have lost her temporarily. And so what we'll maybe do is instead of waiting, we'll move on to briefing from the director, and hopefully she will join us but she's still there. So I don't know what's going on, but we'll move on to briefing from the chair. Go ahead. I'm sorry, briefing from the director. Go ahead, Madam Director.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Last week, we had the pleasure of announcing the recipients of the annual Directors Citation Awards and Employee Recognition Awards, and you're encouraged to visit our website to read more about this year's recipients. I'd like to extend my deepest appreciation to everyone for your hard work and dedication to the OCDSB, the OCDSB community and students, especially in this most challenging of school years. A reminder of the second session of the OCDSB Black Excellence Series next Tuesday evening, May the 18th at 7 p.m. We are fortunate to have 4 professionals join us to share career advice for students. Please visit our website for details. And finally, and this is great news, I'd like to close by congratulating Earl of March student Tasneem Al-Nahas, who has been recognized as a 2021 Lauren Scholar. This is Canada's largest undergraduate merit award. Tasneem was recognized for her outstanding leadership, commitment, and contributions to her school and to her local community. Tasneem looks forward to pursuing a Bachelor of Science and volunteering more of her time in her community. Tasneem is joining a cohort of 30 Lauren Scholars across Canada out of 6,000 applicants. She is one of 9 to be selected within Ontario this year. And it is a big deal because we don't have a Lauren Scholar every year in the OCDSB. And so it certainly behooves us to celebrate this accomplishment significantly. It is a remarkable accomplishment, and we want her to know that we all wish her the very best in her future pursuits. And so that is my update for you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. And before we go to the COVID-19 update, I'm just wondering if there are any questions for the Director on that recent update. And seeing none, I'd like to go back to the Chair, who was so rudely cut off by your internet provider. Go ahead, Chair.
I think it's all my neighbors live streaming or streaming Netflix or something. But I was just saying that student trustee Joy Liu will be moving on at the end of this year, wishing her a proper thank you and goodbye at our board meeting in June. Second item is that we have made available for students, parents, and community members a new survey as part of the policy and practice review of police involvement in OCDSB schools. The survey will close at the end of the day on May the 16th. More information has been emailed to all families, or you can visit the OCDSB website. May is also Speech and Hearing Month, and tomorrow our OCDSB speech language pathologists will be hosting 2 open house information sessions for families. There's still time to register. More details were shared in last week's parent update, or again, you can visit our website. And finally, there is a lot to celebrate this month as we mark Asian and South Asian Heritage Month and Jewish Heritage Month. And also this week, we would like to wish a blessed Eid al-Fitr to all families who will be celebrating. And that concludes my briefing for tonight.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Are there any questions for the Chair on our briefing? And seeing none, thank you very much. And moving on to the COVID-19 update, Madam Director.
Thank you, through you, Chair. At this time, remote learning continues for the vast majority of our students. We acknowledge and appreciate those employees who are supporting some of our students with the most complex special education needs who are learning in person during this stay-at-home order. That order is currently scheduled to continue until at least May 18th. But we do not yet have any further information on the possible return to in-person learning. There have been a lot of inquiries about vaccines. All school-based staff are now eligible to book vaccine appointments. We encourage all eligible employees to get vaccinated. Vaccines are also available to anyone 18 plus who resides in one of the 3 designated postal code areas in Ottawa, K1T, K1V, or K2V. With the possibility of vaccine availability for 12 to 18-year-olds, we have asked Ottawa Public Health and CHEO for information that can be shared with families about vaccines for children as soon as it's available. In terms of the asymptomatic testing, we continue to provide communications support to our health partners to promote awareness of asymptomatic testing in the community. This week, that includes a series of mobile test centers in designated communities. OPH and CHEO are looking forward to testing asymptomatic strategies or trying out asymptomatic strategies, which could be used to support the sustainable, safe operations of schools starting in September. This includes take-home testing kits that can easily be self-administered. Discussions are currently underway about piloting this model to inform future planning. This past week, on May 4th, the Ministry of Education provided some additional directives and funding information related to the upcoming school year. So that's the 2021-22 school year. School boards have been advised to plan for in-person learning with cohorting in place and plans for pivoting to other modes of delivery if necessary. Some of the highlights of the information from the ministry include funding to offset costs relating to staffing, cleaning, health and safety protocols associated with managing COVID-19. Our staff is trying to work through a lot of some very complex memos pertaining to these funding models and the rules that go with them. And so we will continue to update the Board of Trustees through the budget process. Also included in the memos and the updates are increased support for student mental health going forward into the fall, and guidance that elementary students should continue to be cohorted with their classmates and homeroom teacher with some access to specialized teachers. So again, similar to this year's model, the elementary school students expected to come into school on a daily basis, but rather than moving classroom to classroom for programming, we would be looking at keeping students cohorted and moving teachers and other educators into classrooms to support a robust program. We also received guidance that school boards will be required to limit secondary school schedules in such a way that we will continue, we're expected to continue in the first semester at least, quadmestering. The good news is we are supported in a 2-class model. So this means that as we go forward into planning into the fall, as we had indicated, we had hoped to be able to announce in June, and we're able to give a signal that that is likely now here in May. Going into the fall, it would be a 2-class model. And the structure of how that will look in terms of timelines, we are still trying to work that piece out. We would be, in our district, we have both quadmestering and octomestering, and so that would continue in the places where it currently exists. We are also asked to cohort students as much as possible, and as much as possible limit the number of student-to-student contacts. We have not been provided with or directed to a specific number, and so this gives us additional flexibility over the realities from this year. The ministry also communicated authority for school boards to continue to offer virtual learning, and we have already communicated that piece, and so we are continuing with designing that structure. This new provincial direction brings more clarity to our planning for September and affirms the quadmester octomester model for secondary, and the confirmation of additional COVID funding and additional mental health supports are very important to addressing the operational needs for student learning and well-being. And so as we continue to do our planning for the fall, we certainly are taking a lot of these guidelines into consideration and using them to shape our structures forward. We do appreciate receiving this kind of information at this point, because what it does do, it allows us to plan in a manner that gives us the stability that we've been hoping for, with the understanding of what could change. So at least we're able to plan for that. And there's definitely some good news pieces in that. And so it certainly allows us to continue to be optimistic as we're going into our fall planning and into the fall startup in September. And that's my COVID update for today, Chair Penny.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. We do have some questions, starting with Ms. Mullison.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question has to go back to the virtual learning. And my question is that the ministry had said that boards were not to request confirmation from parents, I believe it was, until June for virtual learning, deciding whether they'd be virtual or in person. And the OCDSB has already done that. And I'm wondering if they'll be reviewing that and opening that back up, especially given the amount of vaccines that are out, and that the children will also be getting a chance to be vaccinated. You may actually see more people coming into brick and mortar than you would be given the numbers that we had back earlier in the year. And I'm wondering if you'll be reopening that.
Yep, through you, Chair. Thank you so much for the question. So there are a number of good news pieces there. One of them is that, like many boards already have done, we did the survey so that we could do the start our staffing planning and structuring. And in fact, we're practically all the way through that in compliance with our commitments to our education staff. That said, however, the other good news piece of it is that when we did do that survey, the indications to us from our communities is a resounding communication that in-person school is the priority to our community. And so what we heard from our community was about a 6% expression of interest for virtual learning over 22% from this past year. So what we've done is we have prepared a brief for all of our school principals to reach out to their communities to see if there are families who wish to change their position. That brief has already been prepared and will be, we'd hope to have it out today, but it will be going tomorrow for further discussion with principals who are then able to reach out to families and to talk about what it is that they need. So if adjustments are going to be made, it can be made at a more granular level. So we have entertained that, but we do recognize that our communities have made it clear in a variety of different ways that for them, while it is that we know that some families still, for a variety of reasons, need the choice for virtual, most of our families and most of our community have expressed clear value for being in person and at school, and we have started our planning to that effect.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moulison. And moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much. And a great previous question and answer. Mine is much more discreet. And that is with respect to the in-person learning that we're offering now during this possibly extended emergency period. And we'll see how case counts go in Ontario and that kind of thing, I suppose. What are the in-person teaching numbers we more or less stabilize at? I assuming all the triaging is being done. There might be some flow back and forth, but I'm assuming it's relatively stable now. So what are our in-person teaching numbers now? And can you at a high level sort of profile for us who those students are? Is it CB sites? Is it elsewhere? Is it 2 or 3 exceptionalities? Is it non-exceptional students? Just like to understand where we're at with that. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Indeed, we have been collecting that data. We have 231 elementary school students attending in person and 51 secondary. We have 143 staff at elementary and 37 staff who are attending in person. 29 schools out of our, sorry, it would be 29 plus 9, so 38 of our schools in all are in fact serving students with most complex needs, and that's 38 schools out of 147. So significantly small a number of students, staff, and schools that are open, and that was our goal. It was very important. We did have messaging from the ministry, messaging from public health, the importance of all of us as a part of this lockdown, limiting mobility. And so recognizing that every time it is that children are coming to school, it is mobility of a variety of adults that is involved with that. So these are students who are being served, who have the highest needs and who are significantly fragile. I see that Superintendent Simmons has opened it. Oh, Superintendent Simmons is shaking his head. So that usually means that I've covered off most of the pieces. I will say to you also that when you asked Trustee Campbell about who is being served, these again are students who, again, we said, over 30 schools. So it's not just our two highest need schools. We do have other programs, but it's mostly students who are have significant challenges pertaining to autism spectrum disorder. Some of our students who are medically fragile, and some of our students who have some significant developmental delays that require significant person-to-person support in order to access their learning. So I'm hoping that that the data and the characterization of the needs has answered your question adequately.
It has very much. Thank you. That's great. I have to express surprise at the number of schools involved, but thank you for the information.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. Moving on to Trustee Fisher.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And I guess the question I have for the director is, as we think about the fall reopening, obviously, like you, I think we're all pleased to see a bit more guidance, a bit more direction from the province in that regard. And you mentioned in your update, I guess the contemplation of returning, and continuing with an octomester, quadmester kind of model. I guess, based on what we know now from the province and what we've heard from our parent and our student community, obviously it's been a very difficult year for them. Are you considering any flexibility within that model as return to September, or is it going to look the same? Can you just speak a little bit in terms of how the guidance from the province might be changing some of your thinking in that regard?
Absolutely, and I appreciate that question, Trustee Fisher, because we have been contemplating that over the last several months. One of the things that we've been asked and we contemplate together all the time is, what have we learned and what needs to be different? So there are a couple of things that need to be different. One of the things being that we recognize we have the opportunity to possibly offer not only 2 courses daily, but possibly offer 2 courses every day. So it's the quadmester or the octomester, but not necessarily alternating days. We can't confirm that yet, because one of the things that has been indicated to us is that that will be firmed up for us in the midsummer. But what we will be doing is planning both ways. So planning as if we have 2 cohorts that are coming to school every day. And if we get the direction that it is not yet safe to bring all students together at the same time, that we will already have a plan for splitting the cohorts without having to disrupt everybody's timetable. So that it would be a change from what we have now, is being able to have daily instruction in person. Short of that, the other piece is what happens on the alternating day. If students are, in fact, if we are in a situation where we do have to go to the alternating day, we have already started to talk about the accountability for teaching and learning on the day where students are not in place in school and at home, because one of the pieces of feedback is that people have had varying experiences there. All the way from students really optimizing the time on their own to students not accessing the asynchronous at all, and everything in between. And so the work that we need to do to ensure that there is probably not just a greater accountability from the point of view of surveillance, but the accountability from the point of view of engagement and motivation. And so how it is that we would be signaling that, but we have a better runway this year than we did last year. And so how we plan to use that runway to improve those eventualities, because the other thing that we do know is, despite getting started, if we're fortunate enough to be there, getting started with full day, everyday 2-course model, the unfortunate reality is that there is a likelihood that there will be pivot times. There will be times when a class will have to close for a period of time, because I think, as optimistic as we might be, I don't think we're in a place where we can say COVID will be behind us on September, whatever, pick a day in September. And so I think that we have to continue to be prepared for those pivot days. And given that preparation, we have to be prepared to ensure that we've taken lessons learned to ensure that we continue to see better motivation, better engagement, and a more accountable use of that time where students are at home. So I'm not sure if that responds fully to your question, but that is our contemplation to this point.
Yeah, no, it does for sure. And I guess the only comment I would have is that, you know, reflecting on the need to revisit accountability, revisit engagement, motivation. I think one thing that I've certainly seen, you know, as a parent with a child who just started grade 9, you know, is ensuring that we're looking also at the depth and breadth of the learning, the pace of the learning, and making sure that this is not the right way of characterizing it, but that academic rigor is there, right? Because I really worry, at least from what I saw this year, that if we go at the same pace next year as we did this year, you know, in my case, my son is going to go 2 years with suboptimal learning, right? And I don't think that that's, and I'm not saying that that's true across all of our secondary sites, but I know that there is that inconsistency, right, across the system. And so I think that academic rigor, that depth and breadth, and ensuring that we are pushing as high as we can on that learning envelope, you know, in these difficult times, I think will be important for students, but also for parents, because I certainly saw some really mixed up and downs this year, which are concerning for me.
Thank you, Trustee Fisher.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Mr. Lesage. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the Director. I note that we have 231 elementary students who are attending school now, largely in our most our high needs settings in CB sites and in specialized systems classes. So 231 students are bringing in 143 elementary staff. So a very high proportion of staff to serve 231 students. This isn't just elementary teachers. These are our education partners in the other bargaining units. And we are hearing from them that despite the first wave of vaccinations coming, they are scared. In many cases, they've been teaching hybrid all year, and it's crushed them. Here they are, almost at the end of the year. They're pretty much at the end of their rope. Madam Director, what can you say to them about what the board can do to support them and to keep them safe at this stage when they're really bearing the brunt of this? Well, in many cases, their own kids are at home and they have to come into work. What can you say to them about what you can do to keep them safe and to support them through this last stretch?
Thank you, Mr. Lesage, and through you, Chair. Yeah, indeed, you know, May is a tough time in education on a good day. And so in this situation where we are charged with some very uncertain waters, everyone is stretched significantly. And those of our staff, and I do agree, Mr. Lesage, that you have identified it's not just teaching staff, it's education assistants. In some cases, it's ECEs, it's some of our principals and vice principals as well, who are in place, as well as some of our custodial and clerical staff. And so we do recognize that the call to action that this staff is undertaking is a significant contribution and brings the term frontline worker to a whole other level. One of the things that we know has been done already, and it was done over the course of the April break, was in fact the move to ensure that These folks were prioritized in getting their first vaccine, first dose of their vaccines. And that has been rolling out actually, again, optimistically, faster than we anticipated. I have to say that I'm worried about how quickly that was going to be done. I do not have the data in front of me, but what I do know from following the information that I am receiving is that that has been continuing to roll out, and to the point where we now have all student-facing educators eligible for a vaccine right away. Of course, the challenge is getting your appointments, but what we have been doing is supporting our staff and encouraging our staff to line up for every possibility for that vaccine and getting that in place as soon as possible. That doesn't necessarily take away the fear of it all, because again, with our most vulnerable students, we recognize that a lot of these students are in these places because they need closer contact than other students do. And so we continue to maintain the supply of PPE, the reminders of the guidance around PPE, additionally, the kind of cleaning protocols that are in place in order to ensure the environment continues to be safe. But in terms of messaging to the staff, one of the things I think is very important for me to say, and I say it on behalf of the senior team, and I would suggest that with the indulgence and taking the liberty to do so on behalf of the trustees, I do want to indicate to the staff that we do recognize that the work that they are doing is reflective of a professionalism that is off the chart. I've seen the work. I've been into some of these rooms, albeit not during the this closure period, but very close to it, just before we closed. I was in at Clifford Valley. I saw the manner in which this staff engages with the students. And I have to say to this group here, as well as publicly, that when I know that there is trepidation, they're not passing that trepidation to their students. This is a highly professional group of people who, despite their own concerns and realities, are bringing an amazing commitment to kids into those rooms with them. And we owe them a huge vote of thanks. So that I do need to say that publicly, because again, I don't know that everyone recognizes the nature of the work that these educators engage with, and the fact that they have helped to make many of their children feel safe. But also we have to recognize the partnership of our families, who also are making the sacrifices that are necessary to engage their children virtually at home in the interest of reducing mobility. So this is truly a community effort, because many of our families, it is challenging for them to be able to support their very high needs children at home, but they have undertaken to do that in partnership with these professionals to again contribute to the community effort to reduce mobility and to help us to get this issue under control. And I see again, Superintendent Simmons is nodding, so it means that I have covered the pieces he thought was important. So I hope, Mr. Lesage, that answers your question appropriately.
Thank you, Madam Director.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Madam Director, for that extensive update. Really appreciate that. So moving on in our agenda to item number 7, matters for action. Report 21-038, Business and Learning Technologies, Appropriate Use of Technology Policy Review. And I'd like to turn over to you, Madam Director, to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair. I will turn this report directly to Superintendent Lehman and his team, Sandy Owens, who's also here today, just signaling a policy review and some next steps. So Superintendent Lehman, would you take the floor, please?
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor, and through you, Chair. So we are here this evening to seek approval for the proposed consultation plan to update policy 100 IT on the appropriate use of technology. As we've been talking about technology a lot lately, the last time that this policy was updated was in 2012. A lot has occurred since then, especially related to even before we got to COVID and the emergency and learning from home and remote learning. So, technology nowadays is heavily embedded into the curriculum, where certainly prior to 2012, that wasn't necessarily the case, and in many cases it was standalone. We've also, experienced over these last 15 months or so, where many of our staff have been, working from home as well. And so certainly this policy covers both students and staff and is not necessarily reflective of the current times. So certainly we feel the need to look at updating the policy. And the final thing I would say right now, before I turn over to Manager Owens, is that based on the feedback that we received through the consultation plan, that would obviously drive the changes to the policy, but the companion procedure would end up being revised and updated as well. So I'm going to ask Manager Owens if Manager Owens could take us through the key considerations, and then I will follow up with the consultation plan. Manager Owens?
Thank you, Superintendent Lehman, and through you, Chair. So this is the appropriate use of technology policy. Pretty much every school board in the province has a policy similar. It's often called acceptable use or responsible use, but they all focus on the standards and expectations of the use of the district's technology for both staff and students. So this is it also has a very comprehensive procedure that we would like to follow up with after the policy is reviewed. So again, I want to point out as well that we recently had brought forward to board the security policy, which was also updated. And these two policies definitely will be very much connected and aligned. And the recent security policy will inform this policy as well. So some of the areas, as Superintendent Lehman said, our role of technology in the curriculum has changed quite significantly since 2012. The computer labs were primarily the area where technology was used in 2012, and we pretty much moved away from computer labs in many cases, with the exception, of course, with our specialty labs in secondary schools, to having mobile technology that's available in the classroom. And if you look at our most recent ministry curricular documents, you can see that the expectation is for students to use technology throughout all curricular areas and to use their critical thinking skills to use the technology appropriately to meet the curricular expectations. So again, we want to be sure that our policy reflects that as well. Digital citizenship is a key part of this policy. At the time that this was written in 2012, Mike Ribble's work, Digital Citizenship Using Technology Appropriately, was the foundation for the policy. It's definitely still a reputable resource, and we thought it was worthwhile looking at the updated version of it, but also looking at what other sources are out there and just reevaluating, is this still the source that we want to use as the foundation for the policy. As Superintendent Lehman said, remote learning has definitely raised the need to update the policy. A lot of incidents and questions had arisen in the last year in terms of what is appropriate use, especially since the learning has moved beyond the school walls. And so definitely we want to make sure that the policy reflects the fact that learning doesn't just happen in and amongst the walls of the school. And then, of course, there's the working at home piece as well. Majority of our central staff are working primarily from home these days. And that raised a lot of questions about how technology should be used when they are working from home. So we want to make sure that the policy reflects that as well. As we've been reviewing our policies, there was another policy that came up that definitely needed to be revised, but we felt probably didn't need to be a standalone policy anymore, and that's our electronic communications policy. It was written in 1998, and that was at the time when email was first introduced into the district, and was designed primarily to talk about how email would be used appropriately within the district. And we felt that it was relevant to just incorporate that policy into our appropriate use policy. So we are recommending that that policy actually be discontinued and all of the concepts be sort of folded into our appropriate use policy. As part of this policy review, we feel that consultation is very much a critical component of it. However, we also would like to reach out to our other districts, also reach out to the organizations that we collaborate with, such as ECNO, the Educational Computing Network of Ontario, to see how other boards are also framing their appropriate use policies. As I mentioned, they're often named different things, but they all aim to achieve the same goal. And also look at other organizations such as the Ontario College of Teachers, the Information and Privacy Commissioner, because they often, they all guide as well on the appropriate use of technology in order to protect student information. So I'm going to pass it back to Superintendent Lehman, who's going to talk more about the consultation process and some of the guiding questions that we're going to suggest.
Thank you, Manager Owens. In Appendix A, there is a fairly robust consultation plan that we've outlined. Our proposal coming to you this evening is to begin in June and finish up our consultation at the end of October, and it would involve a variety of stakeholders. We would begin in June and have a survey on the board's website that would be open to anyone that would like to submit their thoughts. We would provide some guiding questions as a result of that. Also in June, we will take the policy for updating and review to our Business and Learning Technologies Department. As you know, our Business and Learning Technologies Department, work through these matters on a daily basis to support our staff and students, who are our two primary users and primary clients, so to speak, that are connected certainly to this policy. They also, from a business and a security aspect, our Business and Learning Technologies team are certainly invaluable in providing us with some information. In the fall, we would engage with focus groups that would include our Parent Involvement Committee, would involve school councils, would involve staff, students. We would also engage in with our Technology Advisory Committee, our digital lead learners who are in our schools certainly as well. We would gather certainly their feedback and then bring that back in a revised policy to DEC and then bring it back to Committee of the Whole, hopefully by the conclusion, certainly of the school year. Over the course of the last 15 months, we've had a lot of sort of informal feedback that has come to us, certainly through the work that we have been doing in supporting the system and in supporting students and staff and parents in the shift to remote. And so whether that ends up being through our office hours, that what we're hearing and the information that we're providing, how we're being responsive to the needs of the folks in the district, or endeavoring to be proactive as well in providing support. And then the other piece is we currently have a business and learning technology transforming how we learn and work plan. That is our 3-year plan. And we currently have a survey that's out this week as well. And we're seeking feedback from our staff related to the use of technology, the comfort levels, the things that they would like to see moving forward, connecting with privacy and security and those types of things. So lots of sort of information that's coming to us at cross purposes that will inform our work, certainly as we move forward. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, please, Chair Penny, and Manager Owens and I are happy to take any questions that individuals may have related to the consultation plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Lehman. And at this time, we do have a list, and starting with Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, and I'd like to move the recommendation, please.
Thank you very much. And do you have introduction, Trustee Blackburn?
Just very briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank Superintendent Lehman and Manager Owens for the presentation and for all the work that they have and those that work with them have put into this. And I look forward to my colleagues and other members of the committee questions and concerns around the consultation plan. This is what we're dealing with right now, is a consultation plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Blackburn. And next on our list, Trustee Ellis.
Yes, thank you. And I was going to ask for clarification. Trustee Blackburn touched on it. And that's, would we be doing the draft policy and concerns we have on that tonight, or is the idea is that we stick to the consultation plan approval? Chair, would you like to?
Superintendent Lehman?
No, I think, no, sorry, Chair. I don't think this is a question for superintendent or the director. I think this is, I'm looking for direction from the chair.
Oh.
This is a political thing. This is not, they don't tell us what we discuss. And I don't mean that to sound the way it is, but you know, this I think is a political decision.
I'm just referring to the actual recommendation, Trustee Ellis, and it does say that the board approved the proposed consultation plan.
Yep. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to know the scope of my to staff. In putting together this consultation plan, had you considered having the Board of Trustees early on in the process have a discussion to go over the draft policy, to highlight items, to get some questions that might come up that could inform further discussions?
Thank you to you, Chair. One of the things that we do recognize, especially having gone through the last experience with the development of a policy, and this is a little different because it's not development from scratch, it's kind of a revision. It has been brought to our attention, and we have been in discussion about what the best ways might be to consider in terms of the engagement and the flow, because clearly trustees, it is the purview of the trustees to make decisions pertaining to policy, and so it would behoove us to create structures that allow for that engagement. So certainly your input there, Trustee Ellis, is certainly a consideration. You asked, have we considered it? Certainly, if that is what you'd like us to consider, we certainly can. Because again, this is the purview of the trustees around this decision making. So if this is a structure you'd like us to entertain, then certainly please, we will take that under advisement and design accordingly.
Well, I'll give a notice of amendment. I'll put more of this together and send it around, but I will be bringing an amendment that will probably add a committee of the whole special meeting or one of the ones in June where we would discuss this, but we'll have a more fulsome debate on that at board on that. I noticed one of the items in it's hard not to talk to the policy when we're doing this, but I noticed one of the items in the draft policy is for principals to monitor and have a say over the content of school council websites. But I don't really see, I'm assuming the school council time to sort of opine on this is September and October. You know, there's three of us, myself and Rob Campbell, who at the time that the consultation policy for the board was developed, Rob and I were on the task force along with then trustee Lynn Scott. And, you know, we advocated very much the school councils needed about 3 months. First month to be presented with it. The second month then to have a conversation, and perhaps they'd need a third month to be able to put together a consensus reply or input to the board. And I don't see that there. So I'm concerned about that. And I see Ms. Mollison is up after me. So perhaps she can comment on that from OCAS's perspective. And I'll leave it at that. Don't have enough time and ask to be put back on the speakers list, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And moving on to Ms. Mollison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Trustee Ellis. So, yeah, I have a bit of concern about the timeline you've got. And one of the concerns I've got is if you plan on reaching out to councils, you have to keep in mind that the month of September usually will be election month. So they have to have an executive elected within the first 30 days. So your first meeting will be their wrap up and their election. So you won't really have a council solidified until guaranteed till the end of the month. So really using September as a consultation month for councils, I think is not wise because you won't be able to. So you're looking at the earliest that you can really reach out and guarantee council, attention will be October. Also, the other thing I was going to mention is that OCASC is not listed on your consultation plan, but you may reach more parents and more councils through OCASC than you will through PIC. So if you do have any interest in reaching out and actually getting some feedback in real time from parents and councils, we'd be very happy to have someone come to one of our meetings virtually, or if we're lucky enough then in person, or hybrid version, and to get some real-time feedback from parents and that sort of thing. So I'd like to make that offer, but I really think you should take a look at your consultation with councils, because September really isn't going to be viable as an option. Also, if there will be any consultation after you come up with your final policy. So when it's finalized, I had a couple parents who had looked at it and wondered if once you have a final version, if there will be consultation again to review it, or if it'll just come to COW. Thank you.
Any comments?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Generally, in terms of when we seek out information through a consultation plan, and the draft policy then does come back to COW, it would be reviewed and either approved or not by the Board of Trustees. So generally, we don't. Maybe if if Executive Officer Giroux, I'm not sure if you had anything that you maybe wanted to add there.
I think there's some good feedback. In this case, we will be letting councils know in June, and appreciate the feedback about timelines for September. We will work through that preliminary consultation and see if there's an opportunity then to bring the draft policy back and post it or make it available so that people can add comment.
Okay, just remember reaching out to councils in June, that a lot of councils don't necessarily meet in June as well. So you may not reach out, reach out, but you may not reach them. Just a thought to keep in mind, especially the way this year is going.
Thank you.
All right. Anything further, Ms. Mollison?
Not at this time, but just to keep that in mind when you're looking at the dates. Thank you.
Some good points. Thank you very much. Moving on to Ms. Lamba.
Yeah, I just want to start out with a question, because I don't know a lot of the background. So my question is you're revising this policy, you're going through consultations, but what was the accessibility lens that's been already done around accessibility? Because I'm not actually seeing an accessibility lens at all in the consultation process, or whether there's even thought to conforming to the AODA. So I'll just leave it at my question, and then I might make some more comments. Thanks.
Staff comment?
Thank you, through you, Chair. It's an important question to ask because we do recognize, particularly when we think about some of our digital platforms, a lot of times people don't realize that since 1998, when Superintendent Lehman and Manager Owens talked about the development of these policies, that the AODA had not at that time, been a thing, really, right? And so a lot of the contemplation of accessibility rules for digital platforms have now taken on a very different shape and will need to be reviewed as a part of this. So certainly, Ms. Lamba, your comments are well taken, and it certainly does need to be reflected in the way it is that we look at this policy, not only in the consultation piece, so accessibility to the consultation, but also what the policy says about compliance there. So your point is certainly duly noted.
Okay, so I guess the consultations, like they should be consulting communities of students or of disability rights advocates, like going to certain organizations with certain disabilities to see how that fits into a policy as well. So I don't know. I know there's a motion on, but I don't see that reflected in the consultations and in consulting outside experts on accessibility, consulting students with disabilities or parents that have students with disabilities. And I also don't see any consultations with the advisory committee on equity or, groups of, a committee that might be dealing with this kind of issue. So those are really my comments. And maybe even consultations with the OADA experts themselves, right? Because they have parameters of what should be in a policy and what it should look like when it comes to technology and barrier. That's really it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Lamba. And I think the staff have noted those points. Moving on to Trustee Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just two comments. One is to reinforce the idea that it is important to allow sufficient time for school councils to respond to these consultations. School councils are busy, they meet once a month, and they really need to have an opportunity to think about it. So sending out some key questions together with the outreach would be a useful thing to do. Second thing is that looking at the existing policy, section 5.6, which is on page 31 of the full package. That's one section that I think needs a lot of work because it talks about the responsibilities around personally owned devices. And let's face it, these days, a lot of us are using board connected resources like our board Google system and so on our personal devices. We're accessing board resources in that way. So I think that's going to need some careful look in terms of how the personally owned devices fit in, because it's not just a matter of personal devices that are used on school property. It is also for many of us an issue of personal devices using boards, network resources when they are off school property as well. So I think there's some big thinking that needs to go into that. And finally, I will also reinforce Ms. Lamba's comments around making sure that accessibility issues are addressed and acknowledged in the policy and also in the consultation plan. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. Moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you very much. Won't move amendments now. There'll probably be a few of them in terms of including adding a SEAC as a consultation partner, et cetera, et cetera. I'm assuming that staff will maybe redraft for a board with respect to some of the input they've heard this evening. My question, though, here is with respect to how, and the good points on the school councils, is how this, and I don't want to overly burden this particular policy initiative or overly freight it, but nevertheless, how we're expecting this policy development, consultation, finalization effort to dovetail or not with a reimagining in terms of how we do policy at the OCDSB, and has been raised already by, I think, Trustee Ellis, perhaps, previously. I think that the notion that things sort of can come sort of last for sort of like a final blessing, perhaps at the end of a pipeline by the Board of Trustees, is perhaps suspect in terms of its, how useful an assumption that is. We do, I think, need potentially to look at our policy standards, what goes into a policy. I've raised this a number of times in a number of different forums. I've been assured that active thinking is going on about how to reimagine this and restructure how we do policy. So if that's the case, my question is how this policy initiative would dovetail with a reimagining of how we do policy at the OCDSB.
Through you, Chair, I do know that Executive Officer Giroux has undertaken to lead our thinking here. One of the things I'm really appreciative, Trustee Campbell, of you tabling that question at this particular time, because one of the things that we need to recognize, and I'm just looking at the gathering of the initial information, as you said, this is something that is under scrutiny at the moment, and reflection about how it is that we're going to make a way forward. And I'm looking at the roster that was provided to me not so long ago of our policies, and in order of what needs to be reviewed and time and cycle and so forth. I'm looking at 123. And so the question then it begs is what the expectation is and the vision is that the Board of Trustees might have around policies and how it is that the cycle is undertaken for renewal. Currently, in looking at the ones that are well behind on the 5-year cycle, we're looking at 47 of them. And so the nature of the kind of consultation that takes months, it would not be likely that we would ever catch up into a cycle. And so that, of course, it is the purview of the Board of Trustees. And so certainly that is a piece of information that is important for your consideration as you reflect. So I will turn it to Executive Officer Giroux, who has done some really good thinking and working with her team with some ideas that have come forward. I can't say they're fully cooked, fully baked, or fully tested yet. But to your point, Trustee Campbell, it is something that we're undertaking seriously because we do have a policy around the maintenance and the cyclical approach to maintaining a set of policy directives that are indeed timely and properly aligned with our legislative compliance and our legislative responsibilities. So I've said a lot, Executive Officer Giroux. I hope I haven't stolen your thunder, but perhaps you may have some comments that might illuminate the question.
Thanks very much. We have been reflecting on the policy process and our experience with the hiring policy most recently. And we engaged in a discussion as a starting point with the senior team about what policies are sort of in people's work plans for review. We've had some discussions about what is the workload and how to navigate that workload, what is the resource demand, and what is the resource demand for a sort of short-term, well, I don't know how short it is, but for a review process versus the ongoing sustainability. We've started to look at doing a gap analysis on our policies. The director touched on that a little bit. We're starting to give some thought to what is the best way to approach them. Is it by group of policies or is it by alignment with work, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other piece we need to give some thought to, and this will be sort of during the review process, is what are our expectations for every policy, recognizing that, you know, we have quite a broad scope of policy areas and quite a range of subject matter expertise that is required. And how could that or should that inform the policy development process in terms of reviewing the policies, but also the consultation? Because as the director indicated, if we've got, you know, 120 policies to review, are we going to take every policy to every committee and expect the same standard of review, or should we have different standards? So to that end, we are currently doing some review of practice areas by other districts and other organizations to see if there are some models that might give us a couple of different avenues. And we will bring all of that back into some kind of framework. But a next step for us in this, we're working on a memo to summarize some of that information for trustees. And we're going to ask some general questions of trustees about your thoughts and reflections on the process and any suggestions you might have. And as a starting point, I don't think that has to be a public meeting discussion. I think we can collect some input and start to filter through that and then bring back something where we can talk about what's the right model, et cetera. So that's probably more information than you needed for tonight's discussion. I don't want to keep you off track, but that's an indication of where we're going.
Thank you very much for that. I'll just a suggestion that since staff have talked to it is I think the policy on policy, because I think that there may not be either a common understanding or a common consensus with respect to what policy's for and what should go into policy, right? And I think that is a really key piece. I don't think we should be sort of redebating that every time. We need some common ground that will help expedite, especially since we have so many policies, as you point out. So it's just something to consider. Just a quick follow-up question. It does go to the timeline with respect to what's before us tonight. I guess what I'm hearing is that this work in establishing, staff memo, staff informal consultation, staff memo, et cetera, and then potentially probably in the fall at some point, maybe board level and I guess community consultation around what should go into policy will go through the fall. So how we do policy discussion and so determinations yield at the end of that process will miss this particular consultation. Is that correct, more or less?
Well, one thing we tried to do, we were drafting this consultation plan as we were going through the hiring policy conversation. And so we did try to reflect on that. And I appreciate the feedback that's come up tonight. One thing that we'll need to think about in terms of this particular policy is that there is some, I don't know what the right word is off the top. There is some need to look at the boundaries that the board needs to set on its use of technology. There are some security issues. There are some infrastructure issues. There are some elements of the policy that need to be established. And that feedback will come from some areas. There are some other areas like we've touched on tonight about user experience and legislative requirements, accessibility, those sorts of things. That's a different lens on the policy. And so we need to think about that. And I think there's enough room in the consultation timelines and plan for us to think about how we can continue to refine that a little bit. And so Trustee Ellis asked at the front end that question about, can we talk about the policy and when do we do that? And that's a piece that we have to sort out, right, in our broader policy process. But I think we'll bring this one back for some discussion after we do some preliminary work. And what's unique about this policy is we've identified that the staff in business and learning technologies who regularly field calls from users and or who work with the infrastructure may have some insight and inform some preliminary thinking. That work can happen in the front end. And then that might put us in a slightly different position in September.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. And I did see Trustee Fisher's hand up briefly.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I was hesitating about whether or not I wanted to weigh into this discussion that Rob has started about the policy on the policy and the process, because I think it's an extremely important one. And obviously, I think we're not going to be sort of in sync with that larger conversation, but I do hope we get there. I think the reason why we're so far behind is because we haven't, as a board, given it the attention that it deserves. And I think it's fair to say that we have probably too many policies. We need to do a gap analysis. We need to do an audit to understand what do we absolutely need as a board, and we need to make sure that our approaches are modern. I think it's ridiculous that we've got approaches on the books that are from 1998 or 1993 when email was just being talked about. So I do think we need to spend some time as a board to really understand what that policy review process is going to look like. We also have to keep in mind that our policies influence procedures, and there's probably a whole suite of procedures sitting underneath the policies that direct the day-to-day business of the staff that are completely out of date as well. So I think there's a big discussion to be had here. It's obviously not tonight, but I hope we can get to it at sometime in the not too distant future, because the policies and procedures really do guide the day-to-day management of the corporation, and in a lot of cases they're just woefully out of date and not where they need to be. So I hope we get to that at some point soon.
Thank you very much. And yes, we do need to have that discussion at a later date, and certain that the administration has taken that to heart, and we'll definitely talk about it at agenda planning moving forward as well, as far as the timing of that is concerned. So right now we do have Trustee Ellis did express a desire to be put back on the bottom of the list. So do you have anything further, Trustee Ellis?
I'm fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And seeing as at the end, we're going to turn it back to Trustee Blackburn for wrap up.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank my colleagues for their comments. And we kind of got off the actual consultation plan, and that's exactly why I said in my opening remarks, we are passing a consultation plan. And then we proceeded to have a whole other conversation that had nothing to do with this actual consultation plan, which is part of the problem. And I remember once it took us over 2 hours to pass a consultation plan. And I jokingly said, which wasn't really actually that funny, at the OCDSB, we consult on who we're going to consult on a consultation plan. We simply cannot go on like this. That is why we're so far behind. We have to, we're going to be asked to make a decision apparently about how we want to proceed. And I can guarantee you, the 12 of us, we're not going to agree on how to proceed. And so we're just going to keep spinning our wheels probably for a very, very long time, because we're not going to agree. We can't take 10 hours of board time for every policy. We can't consult for 18 months on something for every policy. I have sat on more than one school council. If you're an engaged school council member, you will find the link, you will fill out the form. Excuse me, Mr. Trustee Ellis, other people got to speak.
Well,
Nobody else got
you're
cut off.
complaining about people going off topic, and you've gone off topic.
Exactly.
All right. Okay,
So,
could you wrap it up?
in
please,
fairness,
Trustee Blackburn?
I get to go off topic too. So anyways, now I lost my train of thought. Anyways, well, hopefully we'll pass this consultation plan and hopefully we'll pass the policy in the next 2 years.
Thank you very much. And like to call on Manager Guthrie to open the motion, the vote for this motion. And if you don't have your eScribe open, then please open it. Yes, I suppose that's a good idea. Maybe instead of eScribe, let's do the old-fashioned way. All those in favor of the recommendation? And opposed? And abstaining? Thank you very much. And that passes. And so our next item is item 7.2, notice of motion, Cambridge Street Community Public School, Trustee Bell. But what I would suggest is that it is 9 minutes to 9. And so why don't we have a quick break and come back at 9, because this is likely to be a subject of some discussion. So let's adjourn until 9 o'clock. Thank you very much. Okay, welcome back. If we could indicate that we're back by trustees turning on their cameras to ensure that we have quorum, please. All right, thank you very much. And welcome back. We're resuming our meeting on our agenda item 7.2, notice of motion re Cambridge Street Community Public School by Trustee Bell. So I'm going to call upon Trustee Bell to introduce her motion.
Thank you, Chair. So about a month ago, many of you know, I held a community meeting where about 50 people attended. We had Somerset West Community, the Boys and Girls Club, early on reps. But what was really amazing was to hear from people that traditionally have not spoken up in this community. And we heard loud and clear that what they want is a vibrant school that meets the needs of all children. Over the past year as trustee, it's been very disheartening to hear the stories from parents of children that are in triple grade split classes whose needs aren't being met. Cambridge has the lowest enrollment in the entire district, and it is declining. And we know that the majority of students that go to that school come from marginalized communities. There are, in the small catchment area, 166 students that are leaving the community to go to other schools. So why is a dual track a better option? I know many of you have your own stories, but the population increases, which means resources increase, opportunities like clubs and sports increase, parent involvement, fundraising increases. And when children go to school in their community, the health of the community increases and there is social cohesion. So I know that you know that this is bigger than Cambridge. We have many English programs that are not thriving. Enrollment has been steadily decreasing for years in these programs. And outcomes are much lower than in the French immersion programs. I also know that the board and the trustees have known about this and have wanted to address this bigger systemic issue for years. And then on the other hand, the community of Cambridge, around Cambridge, has been advocating for over a decade. So accommodation pupil reviews, the large scale reviews, that's out of our hands. What is within our power is to take meaningful steps towards equity when we can. And we have an opportunity here. And I really ask, if not now, how many years before this community will actually get what it has been advocating for all of the students? I really appreciate the time that Camille and Mike and Karen and everyone has given me on this to go through the numbers and the possibilities. And I really, I hope that we will take this action to improve the lives of not only those students in Cambridge, but the entire community here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I would like to turn it over to the director if she has any comment, any staff comment on this matter.
Thank you, Chair. I will bring a few comments, but I think that this is a trustee discussion, and I'm sure that many of the trustees will have lots of questions to direct to us. I did want to indicate, since the trustee did reference that there has already been some discussion with staff, and so staff have tried to provide as much information as possible to inform some thinking, and we are happy to bring that forward today. I do want to just because I do think about the characterization of the English language programs in our system. And while it is, we do recognize that there are patterns and challenges and smallness and all of those pieces, that it really pleased me to hear and relieved me to hear one of the delegates talk about the vibrance of Cambridge and the fact that in my own research, because unfortunately Cambridge was the next school on the list to be visited after the April 12th, and we know what happened there. But I did do research into it, and one of the things that has been shared with me is that it's a small and mighty school. And so one of the things that is continues to be vibrant is very much the clubs and the sports and the events. And one of the things that was shared with me is, in fact, a little known fact that Cambridge is actually considered a volleyball giant in the district, having won a number of championships in their division. The other piece is in terms of the characterization of our English programs. I am pleased to be able to say that while it is I haven't visited Cambridge in person, I have visited out of our 21 programs across the district that are English language only with French, core French, that of the 21, I have visited in person 13. And I think about the night that I went to Hawthorne. And when I went to Hawthorne that night, it was for the family math night, where parents were incredibly engaged. I really feel that it's important to share this characterization and to bring some of that anecdotal piece because it's important for me to communicate to the community. Learning is happening in these schools. And while it is that there is smallness, I think one of the things that has been already shared with us from some of the delegates is the commitment of the staff at Cambridge, but similarly, I've seen it at Dunlop, I saw it at Roland Michener, I saw it at Hulse in incredible ways, I saw it at Pinecrest, I saw it at Bragg Green, innovative learning and engagement that was remarkable. And so I think that it is really important to recognize that there is not just one path to the outcomes that we're looking for. And so I won't continue to wax philosophical. This is a time for trustees to have commentary, but I do want to put some context around those pieces because, again, we heard from delegates who brought multiple perspectives. So I'll leave my comments at this point. I do believe that one of the comments that Trustee Blackburn brought up is an important one about the fact that when we think about change in our district, that is significant, that as a board of trustees, you are charged with a system approach as opposed to an ad hoc approach. And that in the spirit of equity and equitable disposition of our resources, that it is a system approach that needs to be undertaken. So I will step away from my comments here. I'm happy to step in if it is appropriate for me, but we do have Superintendent Carson is here with Manager Osvitak, who very, very informed. We have the superintendent for the school is with us. Superintendent Dua is present to respond to questions as well. And we do have, and importantly, when we think about program, we do have Superintendent Tuage with us, who also is here to support the discussion if you so need. So back to you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Madam Director. And we do have a small list starting with Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. And I'd like to thank the director for her comments. I listened very carefully to them. Before I state my position on this, I would like a staff comment. We have, preferably from the Manager of Planning, I noticed she's here. So the topic of our 5-year plan, with only 1 year being complete, has been mentioned several times. Do you anticipate, since it's been paused for a while, do you anticipate that plan changing significantly?
Mr. Chair, through you, we'll have to keep evaluating things to know the urgency of what needs to be brought forward. But certainly, it's been the planning approach to take a broader based look at things, an area review sort of look at things, rather than just involve a couple of schools.
Thank you for that, Manager Osvitak. And so I'll just say I will not be supporting this motion based on what both the director and Manager Osvitak has said, and based on my experience of being a trustee for 10 years and having gone through lots of accommodation reviews, having been a trustee who closed 2 schools in her zone, which was very painful. And I am very sensitive to the comments that some of the delegates made. I myself went to the same public school that my father went to. Every day I walked by the trophy case, and there was a trophy in that case with his name on it. That school has since been torn down, which was very emotional for many people in my small community. And in fact, both the public schools I went to have been torn down. And I'm not suggesting that's what's going to happen here, and I'm even surprised people are talking about it closing, because that's news to me. And from an equity perspective, I will go back to what Ms. Carr was talking about. In that community, there are many raised schools. They have been waiting patiently. They are next on the list, and I haven't heard anything from staff that needs to be altered. We cannot do one-offs. We have to take a strategic approach to these things, and that's what's equitable and that's what's fair to everyone in the district. And a lot of the things that can be said for the community of Cambridge can be said for lots of our communities. And so we do need to take a strategic approach when we're looking at these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Blackburn. Moving on to Trustee Boothby.
Thank you, Chair. And I have a couple of questions for staff. So I have a lot of sympathy for this community because small schools aren't the most ideal, although in some ways they can actually create really incredible communities. I happen to have one of the small schools that the director talked about, Roland Michener, in my area, and it has been struggling with enrollment for a number of years, but it's actually a really rich community. So one of my questions is, so if we were to just bring French immersion into this school, how does that help the English kids? I mean, they're still going to have triple split classes. It's still going to be the same kind of thing for them, or am I incorrect about that?
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, I'll jump in, I guess, and begin. I don't think there's going to be anything done specifically for the English program. I think some would argue with greater critical mass at the school, there might be more general opportunities, but when it comes to the English program itself, our experience has been that adding an EFI stream can actually in some cases, not all cases, but can influence those numbers even more negatively than we start with. So I don't expect any growth in the English program with the addition of EFI.
Okay, thanks for that. And that for sure is one of my concerns, because if you look at the number this year, I understand is 55, but I went back and looked at last year's enrollment and it was around 70. And this school can hold about 323 kids. So that's about 22% of the school would be English. And a fear that I would have is that potentially now the EFI program overwhelms the English program. And that's a concern for me, that I feel like maybe some of those kids that are in the English program, that this was their home, will feel like now they're being overwhelmed by the EFI program. So I certainly have a concern about that. But I also, if I look at this area and I look at the elementary schools that are there, which are Conant, Centennial, Cambridge, Devonshire, Elgin, they're certainly Conant, Centennial, and Cambridge are all in a pretty tight area. And if you look at their catchment areas, they're all very close and very tight to each other. And so I'm not sure how we could actually do a really good job, because we are under, unfortunately, this moratorium of doing these area reviews from the province. And if we don't take the time to look at all these schools holistically, we may have to cycle back around in the next 2 or 3 years to look at all these schools holistically, and then end up with kids needing to have more transitions because we just did this as what I'm going to call a stopgap measure, because we didn't have the opportunity to look at all of those elementary schools and do a comprehensive look at the programs, at the number of kids that are going to be in those programs. We might even have to look at grade structures. But if we do it in a one-off system like this, we're not going to have an opportunity to do that, or an opportunity to do what's best for this entire community. So I do understand and I hear what the community is saying, but I'm concerned we'll be back at this in short term if we did this stopgap measure, and then those communities wouldn't be happy with what we would have to do then, because there may be more transitions, and what we promise today we may not be able to promise in 2 years down the road. So I'll listen to the debate, but for me right now, this is a really difficult to do a one-off. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Trustee Boothby. Moving on to Trustee Ellis. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to explain my position on this, but first let me say, this board has done one-offs, and so I'm not opposed to that. But in my particular case, I have a school that's looking to hive off some of their EFI students. But there are 3 schools that would love to have them. And I've resisted, well, I've told my community flat out, I would not be supportive of a one-off for that. And the reason is that, again, we're talking about the accommodation review, that if you move a program to which of these 3 schools gets this program, and whichever that school is, it will have an impact when we're looking at accommodation review. So personally, you're asking me to do something I've told my own community I'm not willing to do. So that's a really hard bar to come across. I don't know if the Cambridge area has the same circumstances where moving some programming to a school outside of a full accommodation review could advantage or disadvantage one school over another. I'll certainly talk to staff and Trustee Bell to try and get a better understanding to see if a one-off might be warranted here, but it's going to have to be pretty clear-cut for me, because I'll hear from my constituents rightly that I'm not willing to support something in my own zone and I'm supporting something in another zone. So I just wanted the community to understand some of the thought process I have around this, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Ellis. And moving on to Trustee Campbell.
Yeah, thank you. Very much appreciate the delegations and the efforts and concern of the trustee involved here. I have a lot of sympathy for what's going on. I have taken the time to independently look at some of the area demographics from StatsCan 2016, and I've looked at area schools and some other things. And the area, especially clustered relatively directly around the school, is importantly different from surrounding areas in terms perhaps of its service needs. That may be changing with gentrification, don't know. And the catchment area for the school currently is quite a bit larger than this smaller area right around the school. But nevertheless, the school is strategically located, I think, and I think perhaps staff already spoken to that. I am concerned about such low numbers, and I am concerned about how we serve this community and neighboring communities strategically. I guess the thing is, for me, it is difficult for me to want to move something like this forward outside of a general review. Trustee Boothby and others have spoken to it, because it will end up either fixing a portion of a larger review and thereby limiting our flexibility of options for the rest of the review, or it won't fix it and there'll have to be transition and more turmoil. And my understanding, though maybe staff could speak to this, is that this area, together with Alta Vista, generally understood, maybe I'm wrong, is next up or close to next up in terms of a major review. So it's not as if it's dozens of years down the road. And I guess the only thing for me that would override this, and to Trustee Ellis's point, we have done one-offs in the past, but they have been cases where we were so concerned about the program. I'm thinking of a rural school, for instance, some years ago. We were so concerned about the welfare of a particular, I believe, English language program that we moved it and consolidated it with another school. And I guess the question is, if we're so concerned about the welfare of the English language program here, do we need to move it in an emergency fashion? I don't know that even bringing an FI program will help that immediately. So and anyway, I look at it and I guess the criteria question I ask myself is there enough of an emergency here to act outside of a general framework? When I look at the English language program and the extra supports I understand maybe have been put in by staff into the school, maybe not, at least on a short-term basis. When I look at the FI needs or wants, yeah, sure, people want FI close to themselves, but that's not an emergency. And so I guess I'm having trouble finding the emergency here that would cause me to act outside of an existing framework. So I'll listen to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Campbell. Moving on to Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and much of sort of my thoughts have been expressed by my fellow trustees already. I do have a couple of questions for staff, and I'd like to get a sense of if there were an EFI program added from the 55 students we're currently seeing, how many might we actually see come in and how many years might that be? So, if we're assuming for a moment that we are able to get some of the students who might be in other schools who have programs in that catchment area, how many might we be talking?
Mr. Chair, I'll begin and see if anybody else wishes to jump in on this. It's a difficult thing for us to presuppose, and I don't mean to be weaselly about it. It's really hard for us to discuss what the outcome of a consultation, an accommodation review would be without having that input. Right now, it's a matter of staff drawing lines on a piece of paper and sort of assuming what we think the logical geographic boundary would be and jumping off from there. I think comments have already been made about the existing Cambridge English boundary and how many children leave that boundary right now to go to Devonshire, because I think this, if it was to go forward in the way in which it was proposed, it's likely a situation that would involve Devonshire and Cambridge and maybe peripherally a couple of other schools, but I think that's doubtful. And I think there are probably, to begin with, we've said in the area of 150, 160 some students in that English catchment that go out right now to other schools. Also in the motion, I would point out to you, there is a good deal of growth predicted for that area. I would disagree with the upper end of the number of units proposed that has been cited. Also, I think from our experience in dealing with the City of Ottawa, we think that development largely comes after 2025. So we do see significant potential for growth in a French program, and therein lies a bit of our concern. We also have Devonshire to contend with and where it's at and where it would be at. And we have the issue that I brought up, first of all, that of the English program and what does it do for those children and where they, if they should be considered to be moved, where should they go? And I will point out that, when we're dealing, we have done lots of one-offs. Absolutely. I don't mean to imply that we don't do one-offs ever, but usually it's something that we're really reluctant to do, and we do because it is a really acute situation. When we look at Cambridge right now, certainly 55 is, that's not a robust number. We're not pleased with that, but there are a couple of factors. We did know, and I think it was Mr. Ehrlich, an earlier delegate who was here, who pointed out the Rochester Heights community is no more. It is part of a larger redevelopment scheme. So we knew that those numbers would drop, but Cambridge has been in the past, between 70 and 100 kids. Really, that Rochester Heights has really influenced it. And of course, the pandemic has. So I don't predict, I want to be clear, I am not predicting great growth in the English program here or elsewhere. So that's certainly not the case. But I also know that Superintendent Dua may want to chime in and talk about the varying supports that go into schools such as Cambridge. So that's just sort of the situation as we see it right now.
Okay, thanks. And perhaps we'll get to Superintendent Dua in a moment. I'll just continue with my comments and questions at this time. I certainly, like others, have great sympathy for this situation. And I remember my first, in fact, I believe it was even my first month as a trustee, faced with the closure emergency situation of Munster. And of course, that was a one-off. And we were in a situation where it just simply wasn't viable, and we had to make a very difficult decision. I think the challenge here, and I agree with my colleagues, that until the province lifts the moratorium, we are just in a conundrum of what do we do when there are larger impacts of area schools within a zone. And I know previous trustee Erica Bronovan certainly advocated very hard for Cambridge, advocated very hard for a accommodation review to take place in that area as soon as possible. And so that was part of that 5-year list. And so I'm very reluctant, while I understand and sympathize with the situation that the community is in. And I certainly just can't, I don't feel right about changing and doing a one-off at this point, because I really believe we as a group of trustees need to be pushing again, and I've said this previously, perhaps we shouldn't be doing it now during a pandemic, but we need to push on the province to reinstate the accommodation review process. That is how we are going to deal with these situations, rather than having to deal with them one-off. And many of us are facing similar situations across the district. And I just don't feel right about opening up that possibility of doing one-offs across the district at this time. I just don't think that that is a good move for the Board of Trustees. So I would rather see us advocating for a reinstatement of the accommodation process.
Thank you very much, Trustee Schwartz. Then moving on to Ms. Lamba.
I wanted to start off a question because I want to bring the equity piece in it, because I haven't heard people talking about that this is, that it's low income, immigrant, racialized community. And so I guess my question is, has that equity lens been done? Because if it hasn't, or even has, if it is true that it is this actually a form of systemic racism that's being perpetuated that may be contrary to the equity roadmap? I put that because, I often hear, oh, okay, there's a problem, and then we'll just wait until change happens, or until we change our policy, right? Like when you have a form of racism, and if it is, I'm putting it out there, because that's the sense I'm getting, if it is a group of racialized communities and immigrants and low income, where it's being effective, then you need to kind of look at it from that systemic lens to say, okay, that needs to be addressed. My background's human rights. So when I hear about a policy that on its face is neutral, but can have like a disproportionate impact on an equity group, racialized groups, or whatever equity group, then you still need to address it. You still need to do that one-off, right? You need to accommodate that, and you need to sort of address it. So I don't actually know, and that's maybe my question is, has there been an equity lens put into this discussion? I saw it in the whereases, but I don't know. So I put that out to whoever can answer it, and then I'll continue.
Through you, Chair, I'm going to begin a response to the question, and there's a big program piece here that I've already asked Superintendent Tuwaj to weigh in, so she will follow me. One of the pieces here, and this does go to the conversation about across the district, because one of the things that trustees had a very profound engagement with a year and several months ago in February of 2020 was this very question brought forward by trustees about some of the patterns that have been observed in English only with core French programs across the district. And some of those patterns do include matters pertaining to poverty, matters pertaining to racialized students, matters pertaining to English language learners. And this is something that was not new to the district conversation in looking at some of the what some are calling now in this conversation about streaming elite programs like French immersion. And so how is it that the structure yields these patterns? One of the things that this district undertook several years ago was to start to address that challenge by saying that all students across the district would have the opportunity in kindergarten year 1 and kindergarten year 2 to have 50% of their day in a French immersion setting. So this means that despite your socioeconomic, racial, language, whatever your experience, all parents had the opportunity to see their children effectively engage in French half days every day as a part of their initial instruction. Because the French immersion piece is a selected piece, but we knew that some parents didn't have enough information to feel informed in the selection. So I know that it's pre-me. It was several years ago that it was undertaken as a district, but not so many years that the data has fully been gathered to look at the impact there. The other piece is that once it is that children have had that opportunity in K1, kindergarten year 1 and kindergarten year 2, that all children, there's no cap in our district around accessing French immersion, and there is no barrier from the point of view of bus transportation. Now, that said, there are some schools where students choosing to go to French immersion will have to travel a significant distance on a bus to get to a French immersion program, and that serves as a barrier to some families. In the case of Cambridge, my understanding, again, I did research because I didn't walk it myself, but the EFI program to which Cambridge students would have access to as grade 1 students is 1.4 kilometers away. So it certainly is not it is a walkable distance, and it certainly is does not take them far out of the community. From a programming point of view, I am going to turn it because, again, you have raised the question of equity. You asked the question whether this has been considered, and what I'm trying to demonstrate is that his has been considered robustly, and I am going to turn it to Superintendent Tuwaj, who might have some further follow-up to illuminate that very question, because it's central to the discussion. So Superintendent Tuwaj, if you would.
Through you, Chair. Thank you very much. So I'm happy to discuss a number of the pieces around the questions that were raised. So building on the director's comments, we did, of course, in 2015, go through a process of de-streaming our kindergarten program in the OCDSB. And that was key for two reasons. It was key to both create a seamless program to your program, which was, of course, Charles Pascal's vision, and because we saw a trend in groups of students who were underrepresented in our FI programming. So they would include at the time our students with special education needs, our students living in low-income households, our English language learners, and our boys. And so the de-streaming at that point was part of the key start. When we think about some of the key work that is taking place in our district around de-streaming, we are a district who is taking that on K to 12, not simply in that transition from grade 8 to grade 9. And when we think about the goal of de-streaming at a district level, it is to identify, to name, and to disrupt systemic barriers. And so part of our key work that we'll be looking at the elementary panel is, of course, the streaming processes that exist at the elementary panel, which would include whether it's our English program, our FI program, and our EFI programming, just to name a few. In terms of the program component, it's really important to know, both in our district and across the province, the huge commitment to really what we'll call learning recovery across the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board and the province. So if we think about the impact of the pandemic, we know that it has disproportionately impacted some of our groups of students and some of our families. And so we have already begun with a group of elementary educators who have been working with us through both a literacy lens and a numeracy lens to really help to identify key screeners and tools to use directly with their students, and that will inform our work going forward, to identify very targeted areas for learning recovery, and then to put in the programs and supports in place prior to the beginning of the next school year, as an example. So if we think about this coming summer, we will have heightened levels of supports for students in place, beginning right in kindergarten with reading interventions right through to grade 12. And so one of the things that you're going to see very clearly in the district is a much greater wraparound support for students who have the greatest needs from a learning perspective. And whether that student is in an English program or that student is in an EFI program or an MFI program, that student would have access based on their particular learning needs. If we think about some bigger, broader areas and next steps, if I can just add into some of the earlier comments that were made about the impact of simply adding a second stream to a school that already has a very small program. One of my roles is also operational and staffing support. So the one piece that we do have to be aware of is that, as shared by Manager Ostafachuk, one of the things that we do know and we have seen in our district when we do add an EFI stream into a single program, English program, is it does further significantly impact the numbers of students that continue in that English program. So it would actually increase the number of combined grade classes and the number of grades within those classes as a result. The other piece from a French language learning perspective is you always want to have a significant enough group of students for learning, whether it's in a single track English program or when you're introducing a new FI program. And so you can imagine in a situation like this, with a small population to start with, it would take multiple years to grow the program, because certainly we have known historically when we try to increase the catchment from students and families who are already in another school, what we have seen historically is many of the families wanting to remain in that present school and their younger siblings wanting to be able to access that school. And so there's a lot of layers of complexity. What I can say in terms of programming supports, all access would be provided, whether that student is in a single track or a dual track based on that student's learning needs.
Okay, I'll just continue. Thank you for that information. I guess my concerns are still that there must still may be the low-income immigrant racialized community who want French immersion for their kids, and then they have to go to a different school. I hear it's like one point some miles away, and things, but I think, you know, they should be able to access that even in their own community as well. I think that's the point, that people, after I heard kindergarten, there's the streaming, but after grade 1, then is the ratio of people leaving Cambridge really high, and they're going to the immersion program, right? So those are the kinds of things that I would look at to see how it's impacting the community. Are racialized immigrants, low-income families having to send their kids off by bus, and sometimes bus transportation works and sometimes it doesn't, because then kids can't do extracurricular, right? Because the bus leaves at a certain time, and if they miss it and things, and some parents don't send their kids on the bus because they want their kids to be able to walk. So I think those kinds of considerations, and whether there is still a systemic problem that are targeting that, those are things that I think really need to be considered, even if it's a one-off. I know my time's up, but those are kind of the equity things I would look at. Thanks.
Carrie, if
Thank
I
you very
might
much.
respond to that, because
Yep.
I think I'd like to close the loop on that statement. So I would like to assure Ms. Lamba that in fact is a consideration, because one of the things I did reference that we have 21 such schools across the district. So the question then becomes, which school do we privilege to move forward on this reality, and why? And so we do recognize that, again, this group of trustees has undertaken a very deep conversation about exactly what has been raised here. And we have a district where there is a very high proportion of access to French immersion. So many of the issues that have been raised about access to extracurricular, access to opportunities, is one that is undertaken quite actively by this district. Simply because everything has been done in a variety of ways. And I can say this having been in multiple districts in my past. This is a district that has undertaken to address those equity of access pieces without barrier as much as possible. But I think pertinent to your point is we can't lose sight of the reality that there are 21 such programs across the system. And to choose how it is to choose different one over another begs a different equity question.
Thanks a lot. And we're going to move on to Trustee Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some questions and some comments on this. Certainly, it's a huge concern that we have this year only 55 students at Cambridge Street. Could staff please provide us with the projected enrollment for September if nothing changes?
And again, not to try and avoid that question or skirt around it. It's a really difficult thing for us to say right now what the projected enrollment is, especially given the opportunity to choose remote learning and that decision being made quite late in the year. What we envisioned for Cambridge is probably something in the area of about 65 to 70 kids if everyone came back to in-person learning. That was about the level at which we were at prior to the pandemic. We do know that there may have been some changes in the core as far as we have seen some movement out of the core. There were certainly trends towards, a bit of rejuvenation and families locating down there. With the pandemic, that has stalled, but we don't have the evidence, especially over any period of time, to really give you that trend. So we're looking at more than they have this year, but less than they have had in years previous, especially with the Rochester Heights redevelopment on the line.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Chair, I've just about almost a minute and a half here because the timer has still been running through everything that Ms. Ostapchuk just said. So I hope you will indulge me a little bit on that. I guess the other big question I have for staff is in terms of specific supports for Cambridge Street, given the small enrollment. And I note that this is not the only school where we have a very small English program enrollment. It's not just something that happens in the English only schools, but right now, or at least as of last year, we had something like 22 small English program schools with fewer than 100 students in grades 1 to 6. And we also had something last year like 67 situations where the grade cohort in the English program was 9 students or fewer. And again, many of those in the English only schools, but also many of them in schools which also housed French immersion programs. So I guess my question is, for those situations where we're looking at triple grades and triple grades and triple grades, what additional supports, if any, are we providing those schools?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'll start with Superintendent Toage from a general point of view. As she pointed out, part of her role is the operational staffing and of some of the pieces, notwithstanding her French immersion expertise. So I'll turn that question to Superintendent Toage.
Through you, Chair. My FSL, which includes core French background, which is very important. What's really important to know, and certainly Chair Scott addressed it, although what we're talking about tonight are single track English program schools, we have many examples in dual track, triple track, and even quadruple track schools in our district where we have very tiny program streams for English and MFI, obviously, since MFI feeds from the English program. So when we look at supports, we look at a number of factors. So we look at the number of total students that would be in that triple class. In fact, we have a number of schools where the total triple class would be 7 or 8 children. So that would be a significantly lower number of students than there would be in any of the other primary classrooms within the district. Where we see larger numbers, we do absolutely look at our needs allocation and provide some additional staffing support to those school sites. And so what that might look like would be an additional teacher who would join to support some of the literacy programming or some of the numeracy programming. But multiple factors will come in play because, again, 7 students is a very different reality than if it's 23 students in 3 different grades. But we look at all those factors. And of course, as we shared earlier, we did create a common scope and sequence for the district for every curricular area, grade 1 through grade 8, with embedded resources and supports that we will continue to build on, that all of our educators have access to.
Thank you very much for that. I do have a couple more questions, but I will ask to be put on the list for a second time, please.
All right, thank you very much. And we're moving on to Trustee Lara.
Thank you. So I think everybody around the table would agree that 55 students is too small for a K-6 school. My first question is, how many students in that K-6 school are in kindergarten? And can you pause my clock? Thanks.
We're still working on some of the latest verification, but we've got less than 10 in year 1, year 2 each.
Okay, it's a K-6 school. How many are there in 3 to 6 who did not opt into MFI?
Okay, well, again, we've got remote learning to take into account here too. So with that, we've got, again, almost every one of the grades, obviously, if you do the math, is less than 10 across the board all the way through.
Okay. So I see there are sort of two requests that have come in simultaneously. One of them is to ensure the veracity of the English program moving forwards, and one of them is to move French immersion into Cambridge. I think, like Rob said, I am much more concerned about the English program and the students who are in classes of 3 split grades than I am about moving French 1.5 kilometers. I would like to know, because we have made innovation one of our core cultures in our strategic plan, what alternatives have we looked at to make sure that this program remains viable? Have we considered drawing a significantly larger circle and bringing in English students from other schools? Have we considered K-3 schools in one and K-6 in the other? What alternatives have we considered beyond simply creating an EFI program?
Maybe I can begin just talking about numbers. And when you say, have we considered looking at anything? Remember, this is a notice of motion. So it's difficult for us certainly we've done some background work with Trustee Bell. Certainly we've looked at this issue ourselves, but I am loath to make determinations in the absence of the input that we usually have. When we look at other English schools in the area, we don't see any that have, hugely robust numbers from which we could draw kids to bolster up Cambridge's numbers. If that's the essence of your question, I don't see that. So I'll just leave it at that. And again, whether or not Prince wishes to weigh in on the other things that we've done to assure viability at the school, I know that there are other things in the works.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, just to clarify a few numbers. This particular year, there's 14 students in the kindergarten program and 40 from grade 1 to 6. 18 of the students are in the virtual, and so they're not counted into the total. Next year, the numbers are similar. One of the things that we've been able to do to support the numbers, Cambridge, for example, is a small school, but it has a very strong commitment to the community. Their staff are quite involved, and they've done a great deal of work in terms of trying to ensure that the students have an opportunity to participate in the various options that they offer. So, for example, the Equal Club is highly regarded as a gold medal club. There is partnership with the Bible Center, the Inuit Center. There's a Boys and Girls Club located in the school. There's an EDP. There's an early on. There's international languages offered in the school. And just to address one of the questions you asked about what have we done to encourage more students coming there. And one of the things that we have offered this year to some of our other schools due to COVID numbers and kindergarten numbers in some of the other schools or grade 1 numbers being a little bit high, we were offered temporary cross-boundary transfers to parents that wanted to have a smaller school or smaller classroom sizes. And so we've been able to move a few students from some of our other schools in the superintendency to Cambridge for this year.
All right. I have a question for, I believe, Ms. Ostapchuk. How long is the district able to continue without accommodation reviews? If we assume that the moratorium was never lifted for some reason, at what point would the imbalances between schools and the inability to redraw lines seriously impact this functioning of the school board?
First of all, I need to be clear. When you say moratorium on accommodation reviews, it doesn't mean that no reviews can be carried out. Indeed, we have carried out some smaller reviews, and it's those one-offs that have come up before where there has been an absolute requirement to do so, where we've looked at various things. The moratorium, what it does is prevent us from really looking at larger scale large-scale reviews, which is the way that we prefer to look at things, because we find the best flexibility and the best stability in the outcomes when we have more opportunity to look at different options. And I think that makes for a more fulsome consultation as well. How long can we hold off? We have been lobbying the province strongly to get their policies in place. I think we probably can stave off for a little while. And when I say that, I mean a year or two. I wouldn't want to go any further. And there may be situations that arise, not so much with low enrollment, but situations with high enrollment, especially in some growth areas where the number of portables on the site and the classrooms that are present just can't sustain the numbers. So we may have to come forward with something like that. But the larger approaches that we spoke of in the long-term plan, where we were looking at areas and really having a deep dive into what the solutions could be, that's really what's impacted by this moratorium. And I should think that we don't have very much longer to wait on those. We have a number of areas that have been waiting a long time and do need to be addressed.
So a question for the director, and that is, what are the ramifications of the Board of Trustees just ordering staff to continue with the accommodation reviews regardless of the provincial moratorium? Because what we've heard today has been that there's a dire need in this community, there are dire needs in other communities, and the longer we continue to not do this, the worse it is going to get. And I don't foresee the moratorium being lifted within this provincial government. I don't think they're going to lift it until after the next election. And if we have a year or two, as we've just heard, I don't think we'll have the time that we need to do these right. And so I'm asking, what are the ramifications of us simply asking you to do them regardless of the moratorium?
Thank you, and that's a good question. I haven't contemplated it deeply. I have asked some questions about that, and some of the answers that come back as we look at it is it is in part about the reaction, response, and outcome from the ministry. We probably would be able to do certain things within some of the confines that are already existing. The question is the nature of the planning and the rollout of the resources. Part of this motion speaks to reports that are expected in September. Today is, I've lost track of the days, it's May 11th. And so the likelihood of us being able to actually produce a report for September, I would say is a very unreasonable request in light of the realities that we are addressing. And then to look at an entire system plan, it would take a significant amount of time to consider what that planning looks like, what would have to come off, and how would we resource that. So I think that it's not just a question of what is going to be the what's the cost to us, the outcome, the pushback, the reaction from the ministry if we chose to go ahead. It is a question of our capacity to be able to do that, which is one of the considerations. I know that CFO Carson has in fact delved into some of this piece and some of his history in this work. He may be able to give a more fulsome response around the ministry reaction. So CFO Carson, if you would.
I will be brief because the director has covered it. As Ms. Ostapchuk said, we have been doing boundary reviews, accommodation reviews. The ministry's guideline really relates to those studies where we are looking at school closures. And as we have said repeatedly, with the resurgence in Centretown, in the eastern part of what we call Ottawa West, when we look at what's happening on the in Ottawa East, we don't need to be shedding space. And so that isn't our issue. It is certainly something that we are looking at, and we and other school boards have said we may need to proceed with these. In other parts of the city where we had prioritized reviews, school consolidation is much more likely to form part of a staff recommendation at the end of it. And so those are the areas where it's much more difficult for us to proceed. But I think it's fair to say that we had some of these discussions with Trustee Bell, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, one of the reasons that we identified that that she focused on the one piece, moving immersion to Cambridge, was because there was recognition that a wider review could not happen and still look for a September 22 implementation. So again, I always hate to put words in somebody's mouth, but I think that was there was recognition that if we are going to look at a broader review, then it certainly cannot be completed within in time for September 2022. Thanks.
Sorry, again, Director, if you said that September 2022 is an unreasonable timeline, what in your eyes would be a reasonable timeline?
Thank you, through you, Chair. I would find that I would be loath to respond to that just on the fly without a consultation and discussion with the CFO and with the planner, with the lead planner, because I think that one of the things that we have discerned today is that there are layers of complexity here. So it's not just a question of putting in a program or not putting in a program and so forth. When you look at all of the programs, all of the schools across the district into this category, there are also layers of other pieces of information or pieces that inform it. So for example, at Cambridge, you're talking about a school where there are multiple other schools in proximity, including an alternative school. And so that influences what an outcome looks like there. But when we start to talk about Roland Michener, or we start to talk about North Gore, we're talking about schools that are in a more suburban or rural area. The outcomes are different. So I would be loath to just kind of pull a timeline out of my hat. I can talk to you about what September 22 and September 21 look like, because that was in the motion and that is what we contemplated. But we certainly, if that is something that it needs to be contemplated further, we would be able to provide a better information with some reflection.
So if I'm understanding what you have said, it's not you would be able to produce a report for December, you would need multiple years.
Well, I wouldn't say years, but it certainly wouldn't be, it would be more like 2 years. If I'm going to be pressed for a number, that's what I would say, is that it would be more like 2 years as opposed to a year, because I would like trustees, to contemplate as well that our going into, when we started this meeting with this conversation, we're going into September 2021, September 22, with over our June to June 2022, with a variety of unknowns still on our plates going into this time. So we are hoping that what we will be looking at is coming out of a very irregular kind of scenario and recalibrating back to something more normal. One of the things that has already been discussed at the very beginning of this meeting was how is it that we are recalibrating learning? And one of the things you heard was the work that is happening to actually do that recalibration, do that reconnection, de-stream grade 9, reconnect kids with learning back into this September. So I think that to introduce a system-wide project at this point, on just, in this minute, again, basically what that does is it says that we're reprioritizing the commitment to recalibrating into learning with something else, and we only have so many resources. But the other thing I think, Trustee Lyra, that you have now put on the table is something that I had written in my book, and I hoped that would come up. We talk about resourcing with money, and we talk about resourcing with staff. Time is a finite resource. And so one of the things that we do have to recognize is that for everything that we resource with money and with people, we also have to reflect that there is also a finite amount of time that is expected. We talked about over 100, and I think we said 127 policies that have to be reviewed, with a whole different conversation about what that should look like from a variety of lenses. That is another layer that requires resourcing and time. So it is a question as to what is reasonable and can be done properly with a long-term impact. A number of trustees have already said, once we go down this road, we don't want to do it again in 5 minutes. So if it is that we are going to invest our time, our money, our effort, and our planning into this kind of work, that what we're doing, and I know that Manager Ostapchuk, her conversations with me all the time, we're not looking at 2 years and 3 years. We're looking at 10 and 15 years when we're talking about an outcome. So I'm sorry I'm not able to be more definitive, but I'm hopeful that that helps to shape some of your thinking from the point of view of the questions that you've asked.
Can I go back on the list, please? Thank you.
Certainly can. Trustee Lyra, going on to Trustee Fisher.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. And first, want to start by saying it's nice to see you, Karen. It's been some time. It's great to have you back. I think just picking off of some of the comments that have been made tonight. First, I want to thank Justine for bringing this issue forward and really forcing an important conversation. And I also want to thank Lyra, 10 after 10, for, I think, getting us to the crux of the issue. We've known for years now that the disparities between the English and French programming has been growing. In some cases, we haven't helped that. In some regards, I think we've accelerated that with 50-50 split in French in the kindergarten years. And we haven't really put on the table in a meaningful way a conversation about how we're addressing our English programming in this board. We know that there are some communities, particularly our downtown communities, that are undergoing some significant transitions. I think, as Karen rightly said, we're going to see some more development downtown. It's a question of how much, but we're going to see development. And obviously, for those schools that are under capacity right now, we need to be able to forecast out and see what that growth is going to look like and what does that mean for some of our schools. But we know, like Cambridge, we've got some schools that are well under capacity, and that raises questions about how we're utilizing our physical spaces. I think there are questions of equity of access that are very real, that need to be talked about as we do that recalibration of our programming. I think all that to say is that we have some major systematic challenges that we have known about for the last number of years, if not longer. And I think the question is, for me, is do we wait and allow these situations to worsen? Or I think, as Lyra indicated, do we put a new plan on the table to say, to put some timelines around how are we going to address some of these issues? Yes, we know that we've got the moratorium on the larger scale accommodation reviews that might result in school closures, but for those other areas that need to be addressed that might not include a school closure, we need to look at some of these issues. We've been talking about it for a long time now. So I guess the question for the director, is, perhaps it's time to put on, the table a strategy, a plan in terms of, we haven't been able to fulfill, elements of the district needs analysis, some of that programmatic review, those recalibrations, because of a lot of other things going on, but we need to get to these things. Otherwise, we're going to have this discussion again in 5 years, and some of these situations are going to worsen even further. So if not now, when, right? And maybe it's time to have another discussion as a board about what is the approach to some of these issues, because we have been talking about them for a long time now. Director?
So I'm presuming it's a comment to the comment then, in terms of how it is that we may look at a way forward. And again, that certainly was not what we anticipated coming into the conversation tonight. So while it is that, I certainly do agree that there is an urgency and there is a need. We've already identified a year and change ago that we recognize that there is a challenge. One of the things that we have done is that we have done work around identifying some of the schools that do require a different approach from an instructional point of view when it comes to equitable outcomes and equity of access. But I think that what you are talking about here goes beyond that. And you're looking at some of the structural pieces that inform how it is that we're using our buildings beyond the pedagogy piece. And that piece requires a bigger plan. So at this point, if this is something that we do need to contemplate, then what we need to do is look at how it is that we're going to contemplate it and what is the timeline for a working plan for that to be undertaken. And I think that that removes us rightly from the consideration of one school, but rather to a system problem, a system challenge that does have an impact, and how it is that we are able to, even in a staged way, pursue it. I'm not able to provide an explicit timeline or plan, coming out of my head in this situation, in this point here. But I think that certainly it is a takeaway, and if that is the direction that the trustees would like us to undertake, we would be able to come back with something that may be a reasonable timeline or a scaled plan that we might be able to contemplate in terms of being able to deliver. Because again, there's no point in creating grandiose promises that we can't deliver on, and still deliver on the things that we've already committed to as well. So that is a takeaway piece. Certainly it's clearly here. It is a significant concern of the community and a significant concern of the trustees, rightly. And you have raised it. It was the conversation a year and 3 months ago. And so it now becomes a question of how it is that we take it forward and how we stage a response to it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Fisher. And Trustee Huff.
I will endeavor to get my camera on as well. Hi. A couple things. One is, I think that first of all, I want to say thank you to all of my colleagues for this incredible conversation around this issue. We've touched on a lot of points that are really germane to a larger conversation that needs to be had, and I think that we're all aware that we have to get there in some time frame. We have to have this conversation. Two things, though, coming in towards the end of this as a bit of a sweep. I think that it might be helpful for those parents and families who are engaging in this meeting with us tonight to understand why there is a moratorium on the review process. They may not be aware of where that has come from and why we are handicapped in this way. And the other question would be, coming at this from a totally different angle and question, if we were to move ahead and add another whole program to this school, what are we talking about in terms of the financial magnitude of that? What does it cost the board to open an entire new program at a school? So those are my two requests for information from staff, please.
Thank you, thank you, Trustee Huff, and I will turn it to Cecil Carson, please.
I think, Chair, that the incremental cost of the resources is it's a tricky number because it's been changing over the last 12 months. It used to be having to bring in hard copy of resources in the library and textbooks and those things. As we've been moving to digital, it's a different look at things. In the past, when we've done boundary reviews, and a boundary review like this, that would likely reduce enrollment at a neighboring school. In some cases, we've taken resources from the other school and brought them in. So it's not a huge, that isn't the huge financial investment. We have done it in the past, and we do it on an incremental basis as it's phased in. The bigger challenge is we would be, unless there's, in a year when we have a fairly flat enrollment picture, it's removing students from one school, which will have the impact of reducing teaching staff at that school, and then going through the normal hiring processes at, in this case, at Cambridge. So the dollar piece really doesn't show up until you go down the road and you start to take a look at what's the impact at the schools that the enrollment has been taken from. And then again, I look at it sort of short to medium term. In the longer term, the population growth should generate more kids. depending on the ultimate fulfillment of those units and how many become true family-based units. While we're certainly hopeful that the city can deliver on that plan, the timing of it is always difficult. So wish I could give you a more precise answer, but really the cost of the resources is not prohibitive, but it really is more to the overall organization and the diffusion of the program.
Thank you so much for that, CFO Carson. I appreciate it.
And if you want a response for the benefit of those listening about the moratorium, I think it really started about 7 years ago when the province was dissatisfied with the process with which, and typically we're talking about school closure accommodation reviews. They were very dissatisfied with the process that they had in place at that time. And so there was a large shift in what they saw as their guidelines to go forward to inform districts how they should conduct these reviews. That was changed 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, actually. And there was a good deal of backlash when of the accommodation reviews under the new guidelines happened. And so I think the province has just asked to pause and look again. But again, we are talking about reviews that result in the closure of a school or the movement of more than 50% of the school's population. And we don't have a timeline from the province about when they will come out with new direction to us. I understand they are working on it though right now.
In the middle of a pandemic.
But a good time for them to do that background work, if you will, with the feedback that they've gotten rather than in the midst of business as usual. And the result of the pandemic has been, although I don't wish to say that there are areas that have kind of backed off in their urgency, but part of it has been there's been a pause across the board, like those areas that we saw that were really concerning us with very high enrollment. Things have slowed a little bit, and so there is a bit of breathing room. And so I think that's what the province is using to develop their new guidelines.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Trustee Huff. And we're now going to move on to our second time speakers. Starting with, were you finished, Trustee Huff? I suppose you were. Move on to Trustee Campbell.
Thank you. I'll try and be quick. Some points I wasn't able to cover previously, but a quick question first. Is there the risk of triple split grades next year at Cambridge, or will staff endeavor to make sure with staffing resources that won't happen?
Thanks, through you, Chair. I'll ask Superintendent Dua to respond to the question, as we have done some work there. Superintendent Dua.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair. The numbers at Cambridge for next year is grade 1 to 3 would be 20 students. Grade 4 to 6 would be 19 students in total. That would naturally be a triple grade split. But what we've done, we've been able to allocate some additional staff support to reduce the classes to a combined class for English and math. So the English and math classes will not be triple grade, they'll be combined.
With two classes each.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. It seems to me that the demographics of the area may be changing. I mean, it's a political question as whether Rochester Heights should have been dealt with the way it has been, but in any event, it seems just on the face of it to be changing. I don't know if it will be the neighborhood going forward that it has been in the past. Maybe it will be. I think that's to be looked at. With respect to Ms. Seema's very good comments, I think it is a concern. The equity lens is a really important concern for all of us, and it has been discussed a lot. I think that to her point, perhaps, I mean, there may be, I have to call it an element of systemic racism, which means unconscious, system institutional racism, if we haven't been placing FI programs in higher needs areas, right? What is up with that? And I think that one of the things we have to look at going forward, like these are amongst the big questions, perhaps that Trustee Fisher and others have been talking to, is what how are we citing programs and where are we going with this? A report came out about a year ago on English versus FI program, which I very much welcomed and called for, that called out the citing of FI locations as an issue. This June, I believe, still in the works, we're supposed to finally have the identity-based data which may tell us who's in various programs. That would be certainly a very interesting report to read in connection with this discussion. And I do think going forward, I mean, so it's a curse and a blessing, I think, to have the moratorium. It's a curse if we need to get things done right away and it stops us, right? And but it can be a blessing. There's a silver lining, perhaps, if we take the pause time, right, to answer some basic questions that are perennially unanswered, such as how do we cite programs? What is the future for the English language program? Should we be looking at important consolidation of program sites? Should we be looking at 50-50 grade one? You know, in a sense, it's a blessing, right? The time to think about these big questions is not when you're in the throes of an accommodation review, right? So in a sense, I'm hoping you take advantage of this time. Though I recognize to the director's point, you know, time is probably the most precious commodity. When does any of this happen? But you know, it's really important. We don't seem to do these foundation pieces well. One of the things I will suggest is that, to the extent I won't make assumptions about
Trustee Campbell, your time is up. So would you like to go on the list for a third time?
I won't burden people a third time. Thank you. I made my points.
Okay, thank you very much. Trustee Scott, go ahead.
Thank you. Just picking up on a few things. I think it's a big issue that the moratorium has really cramped our style in terms of being able to do some of those adjustments, moving programs around, particularly if it would involve switching students into a different facility for, say, a whole program out of one school. And if that means right-sizing the program and the school together. Right now, if it needs moving more than 50% of the existing enrollment at a school, that simply isn't on. And so I sincerely hope that the province will get its act together and get a guideline out. And certainly our board is not the only one that has raised the issue. Other boards are also in the same situation. In terms of this particular motion, I think the big question for me is, what are we actually going to achieve for the English program students? And that really doesn't seem too likely to change, other than through the additional resources we can provide to Cambridge Street and the different ways we can use those, as Superintendent Duas has already outlined to us, and Superintendent Duaj. But when we look at this issue and consider as well the streaming effect of immersion, which we've all suspected of, and I look forward to seeing the identity-based data on that. We also have to consider the impacts of the gentrification in the area generally, and how that has also changed people's program choices and the involvement of parents and community functions. And those are still very much in a state of flux as well. I would have great difficulty supporting this one as a one-off if our objective is to improve things for the English program students, which I think need to be our first consideration here. I think that we can improve things as much as possible for those students while leaving the school in place and taking the time to do some serious thinking, as Trustee Campbell has suggested, about the implications of our program structures in the OCDSB. When we did our French immersion review, or our French programming review, gee, that's more than 10 years ago now, that we missed some opportunities. We perhaps chickened out a bit over some of the changes we could have considered making at that time. Now we are paying the price when we look at the enrollment continuing to decline in our English program schools. And so maybe it's time we roll that one into our conversations as well going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Scott. And Trustee Lyra.
I wanted to thank the director for her answers to my questions and to apologize for putting her on the spot earlier. I've given a lot of thought to what has been said by staff and by my fellow trustees, and I'm going to be voting against this motion because I don't think moving an EFI program in here is the solution to the issue at hand. I know it's what the community wants, but I think that what we as a district need to be doing is having those serious talks about our English program in general and ensuring that our English program at all of our schools survives. And we could slap a Band-Aid on this one and move an EFI program in, and we could slap a Band-Aid in at a handful of other schools, but I don't think we can fix our district's problems with a series of Band-Aid solutions.
Thank you very much, Trustee Lyra. And Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Trustee Lyra said it very well. I don't believe either that we can just put Band-Aids onto what has become big issues within our district. And I just do want to address the issue of equity, because it is not just about racial equity. It is about equity of student outcome in this circumstance too. And I think what I'm most concerned about, not only with the English program, but particularly with small schools, is that the longer we wait to actually do reviews, to be able to get the kind of programming into, or to have the students have access to the programming that they all deserve to have, the longer we wait to be able to do that, the more stark the results are going to become. And then the harder the decisions about potential closures of schools and so forth that we're going to be facing. And I think it behooves us as a board to really go back to the province. And I said that earlier, but I think it is, we need to go back and continue to push that we need to be allowed to do these types of accommodation reviews, because it's the right thing for our students. And you know, one-offs, I do worry as well about what happens if we do a one-off 2-3 years from now, what that means when we are able to do an accommodation review and things change for those families and those students again. Also, I don't believe that that's the right solution, but I very much want to just echo what I heard from a number of colleagues, director and staff. I think it's absolutely, we need to start looking at these issues. Use this time. It was well stated by Trustee Campbell. Now let's use the time that we have before we actually have the accommodation reviews, and be prepared to deal with these systemic issues within our board. So thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to Justine. My initial thought when this motion came forward was, oh my goodness, how are we going to deal with this? But I think it's actually been a remarkably great discussion, and it's really thanks to you for bringing forward a motion to push this, to push our thinking, and appreciate the fact that we've had an opportunity to discuss tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then turning it back to Trustee Bell. Wrap up.
Great. So how everyone knows that I will start off is my gratitude. So I am very grateful that this conversation has happened. I'm also very grateful because the more that I learn about taking anti-racist action and what is discrimination, I've seen it in play this evening, and it's really disheartening. So we're talking about a community that had a shooting last week and a stabbing, where continually there has been segregation between those that are privileged and those that are marginalized. And those students, those whatever 40 students that are in that English program will have a triple grade split for 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and then they're out of school. And I try not to get emotional, but if you don't listen to the people that are most marginalized, if you don't hear what they have to say, and you continue to say, deal with it later, it is systemic discrimination in action. You have an opportunity. Why this school instead of others? What is it going to fix? If you put in the extra pupils, you get the extra resources. If you get extra parents in there, you get extra fundraising. There is not sports teams. There is a Boys and Girls Club. All of the parents that have called me saying, my son's not learning to read. My son's learning nothing in this triple grade split. I'm not sending him back. We're going to end up in this place in 2 or 3 years down the road, and we're going to say we missed an opportunity to take action. And I know my motion makes people feel uncomfortable, but the fact is I brought this forth. It's research. I spoke with Karen. I spoke with Mike. I spoke with Camille about it. No, it's not perfect. It doesn't deal with the whole big issue. But when you actually make a commitment to take anti-racist action, to be an anti-racist, you actually take that. And I know you all have your cameras off. Like, it's just, you can hide behind it. You're just not going to make a difference. Like, it's so sad. You heard from the community. We've heard from the community for years. And we're choosing to just ignore them. Let those kids wait. We have an opportunity right now to do that review, and it's feasible. The administration has said it's feasible, and we could make a real impact on this community that has a lot of challenges. This is our opportunity to step up with equity. I appreciate you turning on your cameras, but I appreciate you actually taking action. You've known about this for years, and you haven't.
Thank you very much, Trustee Bell. And with that, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor of the motion? And opposed? And abstaining. Thank you very much. And the motion fails. And at this point, I'd like to call the 10:30 vote. There are 12 trustees here, so we need 8 or 12 to continue. There's just some booking items, but all those in favor of continuing past 10:30. Thank you very much, and that passes. So moving on then to reports from statutory and other committees. Item 8.2, I'd like to call for, or sorry, 8.1, I'd like to call for a mover to confirm the Parent Involvement Committee minutes of March 31st, 2021. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. And are there changes and or omissions to that report? Trustee Blackburn?
I just, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I have a correction.
Okay.
Under non-voting members, there should only be one trustee listed there.
All right, correction noted. Any other errors or omissions? And seeing none, I'd like to call the question on the amended PIC report of March 31st. All those in favor receiving it? And opposed? Thank you very much, and that passes. Item 8.2, I'd like to call for a mover to confirm this, the SEAC minutes of April 7th, 2021. Trustee Campbell, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question. All those in favor of receiving the report? And opposed? Thank you, and that passes. I'd like to call for a mover to confirm receipt of the Indigenous Education Advisory Council minutes of April 22nd, 2021. Trustee Huff, thank you very much. Are there any errors and or omissions? Seeing none, I'd like to call the question on that. All those in favor of receipt? Thank you, and opposed? And that passes. Thank you very much. Information items, report from OSPA, Trustee Boothby.
There's no real report this evening, Chair. I'll just remind trustees that the AGM is taking place on Saturday, June 12th. The keynote speaker does start at 9 a.m. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the information is on the OPSO website of all the information with regards to the AGM, right?
That is correct. And
Thank you.
Keynote speaker is Kiki O.G. Thompson, the founder and principal consultant for COJO Institute.
Thank you. Item 9.2, new ministry initiatives. Madam Director.
Thank you, Chair. All of the initiatives that are pertinent were brought forward in the COVID-19 update. There's nothing further to add.
Thank you very much. OSTA update. Is there any OSTA update, Madam Director?
There's no OSTA update.
Sorry.
This evening.
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that, Trustee Jenkins. New business. Is there any new business this evening? Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through you, I'm going to bring this up. I have a great difficulty sitting on a board where it is suggested that if I don't conduct myself in a certain way, that I'm not committed to anti-racism. I don't understand why we allow this to be said.
I don't think this is new business.
Well, I'm bringing it up because something was just said and I'm bringing it up. When would you like me to bring it up? I haven't been called out of order by the person in the chair. So, you know, I think as a board, we really need to think about this. And if we're going to continue, because to me, we're on a slippery slope. If somebody's allowed to continually accuse me of engaging in very problematic behavior, which I'm not engaging in, I made a decision based on the evidence with which most of us did. Does that mean I'm allowed to accuse my colleagues of certain things when I don't particularly get my way? Because I might do that, and whether or not I, you know, to engage in emotional manipulation. And I noticed Trustee Bell's
Point of order, point of privilege, point of privilege.
Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Blackburn.
That's
anti-equity work.
You're crossing the line, Trustee Blackburn.
You're crossing, please stop.
You're crossing the line, Trustee Blackburn.
Well, and she didn't?
Your general comments.
She didn't?
Your general comments are noted, Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trustee Fisher.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I just wanted to use the opportunity to say that my Wi-Fi hasn't been great tonight. That's why I had my video off, and it's not because I don't care about the Cambridge community. I really do appreciate Justine bringing these issues forward. And unfortunately, like the chair at the beginning of the meeting, my Wi-Fi has been up and down. So that's why my camera was off.
Thank you very much, Trustee Fisher, for saying that. A lot of people's Wi-Fi is questionable these days. I don't know why. Trustee Campbell, go ahead.
I guess on that, thank you. I typically have my camera off when not speaking. In any event, I do have a independent item. About a month ago, maybe more than that, I don't know. I had asked staff if there was they could find direction for parents and perhaps school-based staff with respect to advice on when it was safe to walk to school in various groups by age and this kind of thing. There are some community resources out there, but I don't know that we have clear guidance for parents, and this has resulted in a very specific argument in my zone. And I think that at the root of this is a lack of information for people. So I was wondering if there's an update.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair. No, I'm not able to provide an update in this minute, but it is something that I can bring back. And by the time we have our next meeting, I do know that OSTA does a lot of work around those pieces pertaining to walking school bus and so forth. So I have made a note. I will turn it through to OSTA first, and if there's any further information, and we can bring it back as a part of the director's update coming into the meeting at the end of the month.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. Trustee Scott, go ahead.
Thank you. We're now some number of weeks into this most recent shutdown, and I am still hearing occasionally from families who have requested hotspots because their kids can't access internet to do their schoolwork otherwise, who still have not received them. So where are we in terms of waiting lists and filling these remaining requests, please?
Thank you for bringing that question forward, Chair Scott, and it is something a couple of other trustees have asked. I know that Superintendent Lehman has done some rollout because we do have a shortage of the actual hotspots, and so there is a solution that Superintendent Lehman's team has undertaken, and I know distribution is going on this week and into the weeks to come. Superintendent Lehman, could you just provide some further details?
Sure, thank you. Through you, Chair. So yes, we have about 2,000 hotspots that are out. We do have a waiting list, and what Manager Owens and her team have been able to do is to take some unused Sonum devices that we have centrally and create hotspots from them. So as Director Williams-Taylor said, our goal would be to have this done by Friday and to get them out either Friday or early next week. So right now we're hopeful that we're able to clear the wait list with those devices, and we'll continue to look for other solutions if we continue to have more students and families that are on the wait list.
If I may, as a follow-up, these kids basically have not been able to access virtual instruction now for weeks. Have other measures been put in place, at least to provide them with materials and assignments and so on, or what are we doing to support them when they can't access?
So through you, Chair, thanks, Trustee Scott. I certainly know I can speak for the South Superintendency that I do know that schools and principals and teachers, when they know that these types of things are occurring and that are taking place, that they have provided sort of paper, opportunities and paper packages and those types of things to assist students with being able to do some learning from that perspective.
Yeah, I worry about the amount of learning that some kids are missing out on in terms of just covering the curriculum, particularly our secondary students. Thank you for continuing to work on this.
You're welcome.
And thank you very much. Trustee Schwartz, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm hesitant to bring back this topic, but I also just want to, for the record, note that I often turn my camera off because I also have kids that, periodically will knock on the door, need my attention. And I think it's important that we all recognize that we're all going through a tough time with our households and so on. And a lot of the subject matter we talk about is emotional. It's emotional because it is dealing with our own individual schools, our community members and so on. And so I just do ask that we all do try to conduct ourselves with decorum and respect. both for the office that we hold and the staff that work at the board, and also just for our community as well. That it's always hard to think beyond just our schools, but our jobs as trustees are to think about the whole district. And so I think when we're talking about the issues like we were tonight, we do, as all of us, have to think beyond just the borders of our own individual schools. And I think I just, for the record, needed to make that statement because I think we can get very hot and emotional around these issues. And I personally agree with Justine that absolutely we need to deal with issues around systemic racism. But I do take offense at being that there is a suggestion that thinking about the district as a whole, that somehow I am not also trying to tackle systemic racism at the same time. So for the record, I just thought it was important to make those statements. So I appreciate the extra time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Trustee Schwartz. And seeing no further new business, I'd like to call the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night.